Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming this morning. I'm happy to be here. I don't think, is our sound system on? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So as we I think we're okay.
Yeah.
Those are just, the spirits letting us know they're around and they're listening too. So as we begin today, let's take a moment to set a very strong motivation that we've come together today to study the teachings of the Buddha, not only to improve our lives here and now, but to give us the tools, the methods, the means, the wisdom to become Buddhists so that we might benefit all sentient beings. So we work on our own minds, not for our own benefit alone, but so that we might be a maximum benefit to others. And so we'll set a strong intention for our practice together today. Great. Now this series we're working through, we're calling it the Happiness Series. And the main idea of it is how to incorporate our studies into our everyday life. So how can we take what we study and our times of meditation and make it part of everything we do during our day, whether it be when we're dealing with loved ones or family or friends, whether we're at work, whether we're doing chores, whether we're going to the movies, listening to music, whatever we're doing, how can we make that Dharma practice? And how can we find within the teachings of the Buddha a way to live the Dharma all the time? Because it's by doing that we develop a taste of actual happiness. It's through that we develop the yearning to be free from the suffering of samsara that actually brings us towards the happiness of Buddha. And so one of the things I emphasized when we started this series is that I think that there's very big benefit to engaging in prayer as a type of meditation and as a type of practice. So we'll begin with some prayers today, like usual, both to set our intention a little more firmly and also to recognize that prayer itself isn't just something you do before you begin a meditation session or before a Dharma teaching. Prayer is something you do to find inspiration. Okay?
This has to go.
No. No, I know. So prayer is something we do to find inspiration and to open our hearts so that we are receptive to receive the teachings of the Buddhists and to receive their guidance and to put it in practice. So prayer is very, very, at least what I've found and from what I've learned from my teachers, is that prayer is a way to soften our minds, to make us receptive, And there are some prayers that when you recite them, you can feel them moving in your minds, and that opens you to the teachings in a way that's more meaningful. And what you also find, and this is something that maybe we'll talk about a little later, but some prayers, when they hit you very strongly, you might have a verse or two from those prayers that stick with you, and you can carry those with you through the day, so that when you're experiencing something difficult, you can recite that verse to yourself, and that whole prayer comes to your mind in that way. So there's something that you don't just do once during the day. You let them live in your heart, in your mind throughout the day. So that's why I like engaging in prayer. So we will do some prayer this morning to begin our session. So let's first start by turning in the Gold Book to page 34. The Essential Buddhist Prayers. And here we will recite the prayer for refuge in bodhicitta 3 times in Tibetan, then once in English. We'll recite the 4 immeasurables 3 times, then the 7 limb prayer and the short mandala offering, so these 2 pages. Sanghe Chodan Soki Chonam La Chancho Pardo Dagni Kyapsu Shi Dagi Jinsogi Pe Sonam Gi Drola Penche Sanghe Khor Sum Ling Choe La Janchu Bardu Dani Gyazu Ji Dagi Jinsogi Pe Sonam Gi Drola Penche Sangye Rupar Sangye Chedan Soki Chonam La Janju Bardu Dagni Kyabsu Ji Dagi Hinsogi Pe Sonam Gi Drola Penche Sangye Drupar Sho. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is without suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions since beginning this time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Take a moment just to meditate on rejoicing, on finding joy in virtue. The virtue we've accumulated, as well as the virtue of all ordinary and holy beings. Become habituated to having joy in virtuous activity. These remain unto the end of cyclic existence. Turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. So we'll do a short mandala offering. So a mandala offering is we visualize offering all of existence, right? We visualize mandala being a map of the cosmos, that we are offering all of this to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and to our gurus. We'll recite this in English. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field, and I offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Eram Guru Anamandala Kam Niyataya. Mandala offering is a very powerful practice. And actually, Venerable Namgong just finished translating a commentary by Noshodam Bhagra about what visualizations you do when you're offering a 37 heat mandala offering. It's very beautiful. I helped edit it. Hopefully that'll be published soon. So, and I know Venerable Geshe Namdak, who is very familiar with the center. Whenever he was stressed out, he would do mandala offerings. You know, when he received a new student that he had to take care of for a while at my house, a young boy, and every day he would spend an hour and a half every afternoon just doing mandala offerings. He got to the point where he wore, when you do a mandala offering, you have this metal plate and you start by rubbing it like this. And he rubbed like a wound into his wrist. He was doing so many mandala offerings. But for him, it was a way to, accumulate a lot of merit. And it calmed his mind very greatly. So it's a really wonderful practice. And hopefully there'll be an English language commentary available soon about what you're actually visualizing. So let's continue with some more prayers. We'll turn to page 73, Praise of Shakyamuni Buddha. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings, to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme among humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides and then said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise then, I prostrate. With pure bodies, formed supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not. Incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all 3 ever devout homage. To all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms, atoms, in all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions, subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see, condition things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. Generally, we would do the Heart Sutra, but maybe we will not do that today. Let's go ahead to page 93 and recite Foundation of All Good Qualities. So Foundation of All Good Qualities is the prayer that gives us some Lamra meditation as well as Guru devotion. So it's very powerful to have it in our mind stream, composed by Dharma. The foundation of all good qualities is the kind and perfect pure Guru. Correct devotion to him is the root of the path. By clearly seeing this and applying great effort, please bless me to rely upon him with great respect. Understanding that the precious freedom of this rebirth is found only once, is greatly meaningful and is difficult to find again, please bless me to generate the mind that unceasingly, day and night, takes its essence. This life is as impermanent as a water bubble. Remember how quickly it decays and death comes. After death, just like the shadow follows the body, the results of black and white karma follow. Finding firm and definite conviction in this, please bless me always to be careful to abandon even the slightest negativity and accomplish all virtuous deeds. Seeking samsaric pleasures is the door to all suffering. They are uncertain and cannot be relied upon. Recognizing these shortcomings, please bless me to generate the strong wish for the bliss of liberation. Led by this pure thought, mindfulness, alertness, and great caution arise. The root of the teachings is keeping the pratimoksha vows. Please bless me to accomplish this essential practice. Just as I have fallen into the sea of samsara, so have all mother migratory beings. Please bless me to see this, train in supreme bodhicitta, and bear the responsibility of freeing migratory beings. Even if I develop only bodhicitta, but I don't develop the 3 types of morality, I will not achieve enlightenment. With my clear recognition of this, please bless me to practice the Bodhisattva vows with great energy. Once I have pacified distractions to wrong objects and correctly analyzed the meaning of reality, please bless me to generate quickly within my mind stream the unified path of calm abiding and special insight. Having become a pure vessel by training in the general path, please bless me to enter the holy gateway of the fortunate ones, the supreme Vajra vehicle. At that time, the basis of accomplishing the two attainments is keeping pure vows and samaya. As I have become firmly convinced of this, please bless me to protect these vows and pledges like my life. Then, having realized the importance of the two stages, the essence of the Vajrayana, by practicing with great energy, never giving up the 4 sessions, please bless me to realize the teachings of the Holy Guru. Like that, may the gurus who show the noble path and the spiritual friends who practice it have long lives. Please bless me to pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. In all my lives, never separated from perfect gurus, may I enjoy the magnificent Dharma. By completing qualities of the stages and paths, may I quickly attain the state of Vajradhara. I think lastly today, let's offer calling the Guru from afar. Which is on page 125 of this text. So this is a prayer that remembers how precious the Guru is in our lives and how we rely upon our spiritual teachers to develop all of the aspects of the path, from renunciation, bodhicitta, understanding of emptiness. We depend upon Mahayana spiritual friends, especially our gurus. And then we see all the Buddhas and all the activities of the Buddhas. And so the benefit of a teacher in this life is something we can't overestimate. And so this is a way to help connect us to that lineage of teaching, whether or not we have a specific teacher who's living with us at the moment. This keeps us connected to the lineage of teachers from the time of the Buddha all the way up until now, and keeps us connected to that practice. Lama, think of me. Lama, think of me. Lama, think of me. The wisdom of great bliss of all Buddhas, one taste with the Dharmakaya, is itself the ultimate nature of all kind lamas. I beseech you, Lama, Dharmakaya, please guide me always without separation in this life, future lives, and the bardo. Wisdom's own illusory appearance, the conqueror with 7 branches, is itself the ultimate basis of emanation of all kind lamas. I beseech you, Lama Sambhogakaya, please guide me always without separation in this life, future lives, and the bardo. The play of various emanations, suiting the dispositions of the many to be subdued, is itself the behavior of the Sambhogakaya of the kind lamas. I beseech you, Lama Nirmanakaya, please guide me always without separation in this life, future lives, and the bardo. The play of the inseparable 3 kayas appearing in the form of the Lama is itself one with the very essence of all kind lamas. I beseech you, Lama, the inseparable 3 kayas, please guide me always without separation in this life, future lives, and the bardo. All the infinite, peaceful, and wrathful yidams are also the Lama's nature. And since no yidam exists apart from the kind Lama himself, I beseech you, Lama, who comprises all yidams, please guide me always without separation in this life, future lives, and the bardo. The ordinary form of all Buddhas arises in the aspect of the Lama. Therefore, no Buddhas are observed apart from the kind Lama himself. I beseech you, Lama, who comprises all Buddhas, please guide me always without separation in this life, future lives, and the bardo. The very form of all conquerors' wisdom, compassion, and power arises as the Lama. Therefore, the supreme Arya Lords, or the 3 types, are also the kind Lama himself. I beseech you, Lama, who combines 3 families in one, please guide me always without separation in this life, future lives, and the bardo. The 100, 5, and 3 types, however many elaborated, are the Lama. The pervasive master himself, in whom they are all included, is also the Lama. I beseech you, Lama, as master of all the families, please guide me always without separation in this life, future lives, and the bardo. The creator of all Buddhas, Dharma, and Sangha is the Lama. The one who combines all 3 refuges is the kind Lama himself. I beseech you, Lama, whose presence combines all refuges, please guide me always without separation in this life, future lives, and the bardo. Thinking of how the actual form of all the Buddhas arises in the aspect of the Lama and mercifully guides me, reminds me of you, Lama. Thinking of how you show the excellent unmistaken path to me, an unfortunate wretched being abandoned by all the Buddhas, reminds me of you, Lama. Thinking of this excellent body, highly meaningful and difficult to obtain, and wishing to take its essence with unerring choice between gain and loss, happiness and suffering, reminds me of you, Lama. Thinking of the experience of not knowing what to do when the great fear of death suddenly descends upon me, reminds me of you, Lama. Thinking of the experience of just now suddenly separating from all the perfections of this life and going on alone, reminds me of you, Lama. Thinking of the experience of my naked body falling into the terrifying fires of hell and being unable to bear it reminds me of you, Lama. Thinking of how the suffering of hunger and thirst without a drop of water is directly experienced in the unfortunate Preta realm reminds me of you, Lama. Thinking of how very repulsive and wretched it is to become a foolish, stupid animal and what it would be like to experience it myself reminds me of you, Lama. Thinking of a refuge to protect me from this, since I am now about to fall into the wretched states of bad migration, reminds me of you, Lama. Thinking of how white and black actions are experienced and how to practice thorough and precise engagement and restraint reminds me of you, Lama. Thinking of a method to escape this prison of endless existences, the source of all suffering, reminds me of you, Lama. Thinking of the plight of my pitiful old mothers, pervasive as space, fallen amidst the fearful ocean of samsara and tormented there, reminds me of you, Lama. Therefore, Lama, please bless me to generate my mental continuum, effortless experience of the profound three principles of the path and the two stages. Please bless me to strive in one pointed practice of the three trainings with the intense thought of renunciation in order to reach the secure state of liberation. Please bless me to train in the precious supreme bodhicitta with the special attitude, taking responsibility to liberate all migrators by myself alone. Please bless me to follow after the ocean of conquerors with the will to cross to the very end of the great waves of the deeds of the conqueror's children. Please bless me to realize the supreme view, free of extremes, in which emptiness and dependent arising, appearance and emptiness complement each other. Please bless me quickly to generate the experience of taking the three kayas into the path, ripening the basis of birth, death, and the bardo. Please bless me to arise as the illusory divine body itself, the play of the four joys and the four emptinesses, the wind and mind absorb in the central channel. Please bless me to meet the ultimate Lama, the bare face of my innate mind, with the covering of perception of true existence and perceiving it as true removed. Please bless me to be one with your three secrets, Lama, in the vast Dharmakaya of great bliss, which has exhausted the elaborations of the two obscurations. In short, please abide inseparably in the center of my heart until the great enlightenment, and mercifully bless me, the child, to follow after you, the Father. Lama, think of me. Lama, think of me. Lama, think of me. Especially with yesterday being the 89th birthday of His Holiness Dalai Lama. A prayer like that is very powerful to keep us connected to our holy gurus, those that are living and those that have showed the aspect of passing away. And so it's a good opportunity to refresh that practice. And this prayer is one powerful way to meditate on the relationship we have with our teachers. Okay, so now that our minds are sufficiently softened, we can maybe have a little discussion. So as part of this happiness series, like I mentioned in the beginning, our goal is to learn different ways to take the teachings of the Buddha and to incorporate them into everything we do during our lives, to make this distinction of our worldly life or our profane life and our spiritual practice or our sacred life, to make that distinction go away so that everything we do is a spiritual practice. It doesn't have to look like a spiritual practice to the outside. When we're at work, people don't have to look at us and say, oh, look at them doing their whatever, their meditation or their prayer, or whatever it is. It doesn't have to look that way because the practice is internal, right? So part of this series is understanding that if we want to find happiness in our everyday life, we want to develop that level of contentment. We need to recognize that everything we do can be imbued with a spiritual practice. The teachings of the Buddha don't only happen when we're meditating or when we're studying. That's how we find happiness. And so this series is about exploring different ways to do that. Some ways are easier for some than others, so we need to find what works for us. And so today, the topics we wanted to discuss are how to incorporate the 6 perfections into your everyday life, as well as how to meditate at home. And I think we can cover kind of both of those together. And in oncoming weeks, starting next week, we're gonna have a little more focus on how to engage in Dharma at the workplace, or what Dharma practices you need to bring or are helpful to bring to the workplace. So meditation at home is a little easier, right? Because you're by yourself. You can you don't need to hide your meditation practice the way you do at work, maybe. But what we really are talking about is not just how to meditate, sit on a cushion and spend 20 minutes meditating. You don't need my advice on how to do that, right? We all know. Just find somewhere to sit, meditate. What we're going to talk about is how everything you do at home can be meditation. The meditation isn't confined to a cushion. And so we'll incorporate that with this idea of the 6 perfections. Or I'll try to, we'll see. So we'll go for maybe another 40 minutes or so. Then we'll take a little bit of a break, have some tea, stretch our legs. Then we will come back. We'll have a little bit of a wrap up. We'll do some meditating together, maybe, if we have time. And that'll be the plan for today. So the 6 perfections, we study them when we begin studying the great scope, right? These are the 6 perfected activities of Bodhisattva. And they're called the perfections. But in both Sanskrit and Tibetan, the word we translate as perfection, paramita, or parchin, means to have gone beyond. And what does it go beyond? It goes beyond the ordinary. It goes beyond the worldly. And so these 6 practices are the practices that live in the minds of all bodhisattvas, that they perfect them. And eventually, as they slowly perfect them, then that helps ripen their mind. And that is what accumulates the merit that allows their understanding of emptiness to then become deeper and deeper, and eventually eliminate all obstacles to omniscience and allow them to become Buddhas. So these 6 perfections, as we practice them, we can think of them in 2 ways. One, by practicing them now to the best of our abilities, it brings us to the Mahayana path, to the path of a bodhisattva. It's making us become familiar with what the mind of a bodhisattva is. Even if we can't practice them perfectly, we practice our version of them to the best we can. So in that way, they're the cause. They serve as the cause for us to accumulate merit and for us to become familiar with the activities of bodhisattva so we can become bodhisattvas ourselves. So they're the cause in that way of entering the path. But they're also the practice of the path itself. So not only are they the cause, they are the substance of what we're doing as living a life like a bodhisattva, right? So we can think of them in 2 ways. One is that they motivate our practice, but then they are our practice. So they're not something we discard once we've done them. They're something we carry with us. And so I thought I would go through the 6 very quickly, and then just so we have the list, and then we will go through them a little more slowly and talk about different ways that we can incorporate them into our everyday life. So many of you have studied this before. Today is going to be a very abbreviated version of it, simply because we could spend weeks talking about the 6 perfections. In fact, I'm sure one of the Discovering Buddhism modules is probably on the 6 perfections, and it's like a 6-week program or something. So today is a very abbreviated version. If you would like to study them more, Lama Zopa Rinpoche's book, The 6 Perfections, very aptly named, is a really wonderful resource. And so I recommend that if you want to just have a little more depth in them. But any Lamrim text will have, the Lamrim Chemo, the great sage of the path to enlightenment, as well as Pabonga's liberation in the palm of your hand, and many other Lamrim texts as well. Any extensive Lamrim commentary will have discussion of the 6 perfections. And so if you want to dig into them deeper, there's a lot of resources for it. So what are the 6 perfections? Generosity or charity. Let's go in order. So generosity and number 2 is ethical discipline or morality. And then patience, joyous effort or enthusiasm or perseverance, sometimes it's called. 5, concentration, and lastly, wisdom, right? So those are the 6. And there are subdivisions of them all. But what's important to remember is they don't exist in isolation. So often they're divided into 36, not just 6. So for instance, you have generosity, right? But there is the generosity of generosity. And there is the ethical discipline of generosity. There's the patience of generosity. There's the perseverance of generosity, the concentration of generosity, and the wisdom of generosity. So all six are combined in generosity. And in the same way, all six are combined within all of them. So that's why they sometimes say there are 36 of them. Right? And then sometimes there are actually listed 10 perfections. There's prayer, there's power, there's top skillful means, and then there is, yeah, sorry, I'm thinking I have them in Tibetan. I'm trying to translate them. Shanti is faster than me. And then there's discriminating wisdom. So sometimes you go to 10, but the six are what we're going to focus on today. Or it's just good to know that if you hear the 10 perfections, what they're referencing is these six, and then a few bonus on top. Okay. So we'll start with charity, because they build on one another. Even though they're all six contained within each other, they do build in a, or at least they're presented in a way that's skillful. So it's useful to go through them in order. So charity is the fundamental practice. Charity is not about giving. It is about generating the mind that wants to give. So actual generosity or charity is a mind. It's not the act of giving, okay? It's the mind that wants to give. It is the mind that isn't attached to your own possessions. So generally, there are three types of generosity. There's generosity of material things. There's the generosity of fearlessness, it's called, which is about saving, saving sentient beings and eliminating harm. And then there's the generosity of Dharma. So giving Dharma instruction or giving Dharma advice or serving as a Dharma friend as part of a Dharma community. It's the giving of Dharma. And so all three of those are types of generosity that we need to practice, we need to cultivate. The most powerful one is the giving of Dharma. But all three of them are incredibly important. And if we think about it, this is the interesting thing about the Bodhisattva's practice, all of them, is that as a Bodhisattva, we're dedicating ourselves to work for the benefit of sentient beings. And we say it's my responsibility to free all sentient beings from suffering, right? That's what I mean by having the Bodhisattva Tao in my mind. Yet, the work I do is to free me from suffering. So I have more skillful means to help others. And so we simultaneously focus on ourselves and others, right? Because we know that right now, my resources are limited. My mental and emotional resources, never mind physical resources, are limited. So I help the best I can, but if I become a Buddha, the further I advance on the path, the more help I can be. So we think of generosity, and worldly generosity offering to other beings is helpful to them, but more helpful is destroying the mind that is attached to possessions. That's why generosity is so powerful, even generosity of worldly things. It's not because I'm giving you something which you may be able to use and may be of great benefit to you. It's because I'm destroying my mind that is attached to that thing as if it were a source of my happiness. I'm destroying or slowly getting rid of those minds of attachment, right? So that's the powerful part of generosity. We shouldn't think of generosity as only being a means that we're giving things to others. We have to recognize what it's doing is transforming our minds, right? Because if billionaires can give away literally hundreds of millions of dollars every day and change the lives of millions of people, but it can never affect their minds. So the act of giving isn't the important part. It's the transformation of mind. And now for the people receiving it, the act of receiving might be quite important to them. So I'm not diminishing that. We live in samsara, we live in the world, and being able to help people in a worldly way, whatever we can do is important. I'm not diminishing that, but I mean, for our spiritual practice, the important part is the transformation of our mind, right? So that's generosity. We'll talk a little bit more about it, about how to incorporate it in our life in a moment. But let's just go through so we make sure we have a clear understanding of what all six are. So based upon generosity, then we have the practice of morality. So generosity is first because in some way it is the easiest. It's the easiest because at least the generosity of material things is easiest because we know the joy of receiving things from others, right? It's very easy for in our experience, when people give us things, it's easy we have joy in that, right? And so it's easy to understand how others can benefit from our generosity. And it's a practice that pervades all religious traditions and non-religious traditions, the idea of giving as a way to help others. So it's very simple, right? So that's why that's the first one that we study. because it's easy for us to access. Next is morality or ethical discipline. Ethical discipline is the basis for all of our practice, in truth. But we need to have some sort of understanding of cause and effect in order to understand that. If we don't believe that, we don't believe in karma, we don't believe that negative things, that suffering is a result of negative actions, then we don't see any basis or reason for engaging in ethical discipline or morality, right? So we have to have some sort of confidence in the Dharma in order for morality to really find place in our life. So again, there's three types of morality. There is refraining from engaging in non-virtues. That's the first type, which is kind of what we'd expect. Not engaging in harmful activity. And then there is the morality of gathering virtuous activity. So not only avoiding harmful activity, but actually actively participating in virtue is a type of morality. And then lastly, the morality of working for others, of working to benefit sentient beings. So we see morality in three ways. One is ceasing to engage in harmful activity. One is actively pursuing virtuous activity. And one is doing that in the service of others. So you can see all three of those can happen simultaneously. They don't have to be distinct, but we do understand them as three different types of morality. Next, we have patience. Patience we think of as the extreme antidote to anger. And for that reason, it's really powerful. And it's very important to practice because anger is the most destructive of emotions. They say even a brief moment of anger directed toward a bodhisattva will destroy eons worth of the roots of virtue if we haven't done the work to preserve it, and dedicate it to others. And we don't know who bodhisattvas are. Any one of you could be bodhisattvas right now, just serving as fulfilling the role of a student to give me an opportunity to teach the Dharma. That's what bodhisattvas do. Bodhisattvas live in our lives in ways that give us the opportunity to practice. And we don't have the karma or the understanding to see that, So you can never trust who is or is not a bodhisattva. Well, some we know right away. You see them and you say, okay, it's clear. But bodhisattvas and Buddhists can take many different forms just to benefit us. Whatever form we need to benefit us, they'll do. So you never know who's a bodhisattva or not. And one moment of anger towards a bodhisattva is so destructive. So being able to cultivate patience is really, really important. So there's three types of patience as well. The first one is not retaliating when harmed. And the second is being able to accept suffering. And this doesn't mean lionizing suffering. It doesn't mean suffering is good, but it means recognizing that since we're in samsara, we're suffering. And instead of letting that overwhelm our minds, we can accept it and we can recognize it as part of the nature of reality while we exist in samsara. Accepting suffering, not retaliating against harm. So when someone harms us, not responding, and then accepting suffering. And accepting suffering can be also very simple. Like you've come to a Dharma teaching today and it can be uncomfortable to sit for a few hours to listen to a Dharma teaching, but you're willing to put yourself in mild discomfort because you want to practice and you want to study. And so that's a type of accepting suffering. So by doing that, you're actually cultivating a type of patience, right? And even if you adjust or you move or you find a more comfortable position, when you come, or if that it's going to be maybe not the most comfortable way to be for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. So that's a type of patience, right? Accepting suffering, even this coarse suffering of having sore legs or a sore back. And you could think that if you aren't willing to develop that patience, then you'd say, oh, I'm just going to skip the teaching today, or I'm going to skip my morning meditation session because I don't want to have to deal with that, And so you can see how not developing that patience can lead you to avoid practicing Dharma. So after that, we have not retaliating against harm, accepting suffering, and then having certainty with regard to the Dharma is the third type of patience. Having certainty with regard to Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha. So when you study and you develop confidence that the Dharma itself, the teachings of the Buddha, are an accurate representation of reality, that they are a right means of finding freedom from suffering, that's a type of patience. So that is a type of patience that we cultivate through study and through meditating on what we study. Next, we have perseverance or joyful effort or enthusiasm, virya in Sanskrit, sundrup, it's been. Vairya, and
Virya.
virya in Sanskrit. These,
Virya is brave, Virya is same.
yeah. Anyway, so perseverance is similar to rejoicing, or perseverance is a mind that finds joy in virtue, right? So we think about perseverance in just a worldly way. When we're facing an obstacle, we find that drive to fight through obstacles, right? We can think of that in our worldly life when we're at work and we have like a deadline and we really don't want to do this job, but you somehow find like a second wind to get through it, right? Or think of athletes or marathon runners, especially people that do long distance running. They find that, to get over as they say, the wall. If you're a runner, you hit a wall and you have to find the perseverance to push through it. So in a worldly sense, we're used to perseverance, finding some sort of inner momentum to push through obstacles. In a spiritual sense, we say that perseverance is, like I said, is finding joy in virtue. And that is what motivates us, right? That when circumstances are difficult, we find joy in virtue behavior, and that is what lets us get through difficult circumstances. So generally, we say there's three types of perseverance as well. There's the armor-like perseverance, and that itself is avoiding non-virtue, armor-like perseverance. Then there is the perseverance of gathering virtue. So this is very similar to patience, as you see, right? First is avoiding non-virtue is a type of perseverance. And then engaging in virtuous activity and study and practice of meditation is a type of perseverance. And then there is the perseverance of working for others as well. Working for others. But the difference between these and patience is that perseverance itself is a mind that is willing to endure suffering for others and finds joy in and rejoicing in virtue. So we often, in the prayers, you hear, let me develop the perseverance to endure even the hell realms so I can benefit one sentient being. Like, let me have that level of perseverance. That let me experience that great of a suffering and still not be discouraged. That no matter the circumstances, I won't be discouraged in my practice. So you can see how that's building up from patience, right? And that's building up from, we have morality as our basis. Generosity is our kind of gateway in, right? Then morality creates a basis upon which we can plant seeds that can grow. And then we have patience, which is allowing ourselves to recognize and experience suffering, not pretending that suffering isn't real, but saying, I'm willing to endure this to benefit others and to develop my own mind. And then not only are we willing to engage, or we're willing to experience suffering, but we find the motivation to persevere through that suffering as a way to benefit others and ourselves in the process. So you see, they build on it. And then the fifth one is concentration, meditative concentration. In general, we say there's two types, there's analytical and single-pointed concentration. So different types of meditation. So for us, in this regard, concentration is just a matter of whatever meditation practice we can do. But again, that doesn't have to occur on the cushion, as we'll talk about. There's all different types of meditation practice. In the context of a bodhisattva who is reaching the perfection of meditation, it means, before you even enter into the bodhisattva path, you already will have developed calm abiding, which is the ability to have single-pointed concentration on any object instantaneously for as long as you want without any effort. And by having that single-pointed practice, you actually experience mental bliss and what's called the pliancy of mental bliss. And so that's a very strong, powerful mind, right? And that's something we can all achieve in this life. You don't have to be Buddhist to achieve that. The Lamas say that if someone who's never practiced meditation can go do a retreat by themselves and within 6 months can achieve calm abiding, maybe a year. I'm gonna be honest, I don't know about that. That seems like really optimistic because I've tried, not for 6 months at a time, but I try every day. And my mind is all over the place. So I think maybe a few hundred years ago, before we had TikTok and YouTube, you could do 6 months, but now we've been poisoned a little bit. I don't know. Regardless, though, the point is, calm abiding meditation is something we can all accomplish in this life if we put effort into it. And what it does, the benefit of having calm abiding meditation is that when you're able to have single-pointed focus, it does multiple things for you. One is it's able to stop your discursive mind from running in circles and controlling you. So it's able to stop you being controlled by your emotions and instead let you control your emotions. It allows you to be in harmful or difficult or complicated circumstances and not be overwhelmed by them, you know? So being able to have a focused mind like that works by allowing you control over your reactions. And then it also allows you to take that mind and point it towards a virtuous object and engage in analysis. So the idea of having an analytic mind, so the type of meditation that builds off of combining is also called meditative equipoise or shine in Tibetan, shamatha in Sanskrit. Building off that is vipassana or hakton or special insight meditation. So this is the type of meditation that uses that single pointed concentration and then develops a type of wisdom by using it to focus on a specific object, right? So vipassana is a type of wisdom, whereas shamatha is a type of concentration. So these work together. You first develop concentration, and then you use that single pointed mind and point it at a Dharma object, and then develop wisdom based on it, or vipassana, special insight. So that is what a Bodhisattva is doing. Their levels of concentration are much higher than ours. So we start with baby concentration, the best we can do. That's the fifth one, concentration. And then the sixth is wisdom. So ultimately, when we talk about wisdom, we're talking about the wisdom that realizes the nature of all reality, the wisdom that understands emptiness, ultimate wisdom. But we also have conventional wisdom. So conventional wisdom is wisdom that understands conventional objects, whether they be important objects in meditation, like the truth about impermanence or karma and its results, or whether they just be conventional objects that allow us to live in the world, whatever types of wisdom we have. So there's conventional wisdom and ultimate wisdom. Those are the two divisions of wisdom. And so ultimately, we're striving to develop ultimate wisdom, right? Which is also known as ultimate bodhicitta, the wisdom that realizes emptiness and exists in the mental continuum of an Arya being. But for now, we work on that slowly, and we have baby insights into whatever Dharma topics we can have, So those are the six. That is a very brief run through of all six. And the reason we need to study them is because these six need to become natural habits in our lives. And you'll find that the more they become naturalized into your life, and the easier it is to practice them. So you're not have to actively think about it, then you find joy in all of them, And it's very simple things. Like for instance, I was talking about this yesterday evening a little bit. When you have an understanding of karma, and based upon that, you're able to develop patience. For instance, when you see someone in the world who engages in some sort of harmful action, whether it be a politician or a famous person, or even just someone in your life, you see them engaging in harmful action, but you realize they're engaging in harmful action because they want happiness. They don't want suffering, the same as me, yet they're confused. They don't understand what real happiness is and what suffering is. And so they're grabbing on to suffering and thinking it's happiness. And because of that, they're engaging in this action that hurts others, right? When you have that realization, then you see that, and right away you develop patience when someone's harming you. Because you realize they're not harming me to harm me. They're harming because they want to be happy, and yet they're suffering. That's not to say let other people harm you, but you instantly have this thought that why would I retaliate against them? Because what they're doing is suffering and creating more suffering for themselves. So retaliating against them is like adding insult to injury. They're already causing themselves more damage than my retaliation could ever do, because what they're doing is suffering and causing more suffering for themselves now and in the future. So when you realize that, that patience can become natural, right? It's not to say let people engage in harmful activity if you have the means to appropriately stop it. I'm not saying that. Don't become a doormat and don't don't excuse others' harmful behavior. But it is recognizing where that harmful behavior comes from and not letting that harmful behavior upset your mind. Because if someone, if you're going to work in the morning and you bump into someone on the sidewalk and they like insult you or yell some bad name at you, that could ruin your whole day, right? You can be angry at that for the whole day. And then you go to work and you're like, oh, man, you're grumpy, and then your work doesn't go well and everything is affected. And then you have a crappy day at work and you go home and you are like curt or with your family and your friends and they get mad at you. It can, like one little thing, some random stranger yelled something at you in the morning and you've allowed it to affect your whole day, right? Yet if we develop patience, when someone does something like that in the morning, we can realize they're just acting out of suffering. I'm not going to retaliate against them, and I'm not going to let that affect my mind. And so that simple moment, then your whole day becomes better because of it. So that's why we need to integrate this into our practice. And at first, again, these 6 don't seem mind-blowing. They're not uncommon in Buddhism, these 6, right? They're very common sense. Like these are all beneficial things to do. You can go tell anyone on the street, Buddhist or not, it's good to practice charity and patience and perseverance. And they're like, yeah, probably, right? Like this isn't mind-blowing stuff. But understanding that intellectually and practicing that are different. So the reason we study it is so it becomes natural. So we don't have to think about it, right? And only that way can we be transformed by this practice. Well, not only that way, but working towards it. So let's talk a little bit about how we can practice. Well, first off, are there any questions before we keep going?
So in the presentation in Madhyamika Tavatara, we have the 10 grounds presented as the perfection.
Mhm.
This may be a little off topic, but I want to ask. So, they say the perfection of generosity is perfected, or reaches a certain excellence on the first ground and like that. But doesn't generosity keep increasing? Why do they select one perfection for each other?
Mhm.
What level does it reach at? I didn't understand that.
Yeah. So what Shanti's mentioning is when you study the entering into the middle way, we'll talk about once you become an Arya being, an Arya Bodhisattva. So you are a Bodhisattva who's realized Bodhicitta, and then you achieve direct insight into the nature of reality. That's what qualifies you to become a quote unquote Arya being. And then the Arya beings, between the one you become an Arya Bodhisattva until you're a Buddha, there are the 10 grounds, which is just different levels of meditative realization that you progress one to the other. And one of the ways that they classify those 10 grounds are in terms of the 10 perfections. So they say that on the first ground is the perfection of generosity, second ground, perfection of morality, and so forth, up through these 10 that I mentioned earlier. And so the question is, why is it that once you perfect generosity on the first ground, doesn't it increase more and more? Or why is it first and so forth? There are different ways of interpreting this. Some say, like I mentioned, that these do build upon each other and that one is the easier one, which is why it's first and so forth. And so when you develop you develop it first because it's easiest, and once it's perfected, it's very similar to the generosity in the mind of the Buddha, not the exact same, but very similar. So it doesn't actually increase anymore until you're able to eliminate all obscurations to omniscience, because you've already perfected it. You know, the lower systems, not the Prasantikas, so the lower philosophical schools don't believe that the perfections can exist in the mind of anyone except for a Buddha. They say that the perfection of there's the practice of the perfection of generosity, and that exists in the mind of a Bodhisattva, but the actual perfection of generosity only exists in the mind of a Buddha. That's what the other philosophical schools say. But the one we ascribe to, the Sankika Madhyamikas, say that no, they do exist in the mind, or they can exist in the mind of Arya beings. Why they go in that order? Some just say because that's the natural order. Once you've perfected it, it doesn't change, but you can still accumulate more merit based on that perfection. So there isn't a radical transformation once you've achieved it, but it continues to accumulate more and more merit. And by association with the other perfections, it becomes more powerful. Because as we said, since all 6 perfections are contained with one another, if you are already pretty good at practicing generosity, but then your practice of concentration increases, that actually increases your practice of generosity as well. Because there's a type of concentration that's included within generosity. So in that way, they still get bigger and bigger as you add more to the pile. So the sum is greater than the combination of its parts in that way. That's a little bit more advanced than we're gonna do today, so I won't go too much more into it. I don't know if that's satisfactory. Not everyone agrees. There are some scholars that say that you can that bodhisattvas can perfect them in a different order, because by having a direct realization into the nature of reality, when you achieve the first round, that you've already accomplished not the perfection of wisdom, but something close to the perfection of wisdom. And so not everyone says you need to go sequentially like that, but that's just a way to understand the natural spiritual progression across the 10 grounds. So as we talked, so let's go back to generosity. Think about how we can incorporate generosity into our life more than just giving things away to people. That's a very easy way, right? But how can we practice generosity in our everyday life every day? First off, I think, like I mentioned, think of the joy you receive, the joy that you have when you receive things, and that can you can see the power of generosity. So that can inspire you to want to practice generosity. And once you recognize that generosity is about destroying minds of attachment, which includes being attached to the results of giving, I should add. You know, when you give something to someone, you can't be attached to what they do with it. You know, if you are, then you're not really giving. It's only partial giving. You see this a lot. There's a great story of this. I've heard numerous stories from numerous teachers about how devotees will give them like very great expensive gifts, and then they just take that gift and give it to the next person in line. Because you know, like how many, you know, lamas don't really need a Rolex, right? Something like this. So they just give it away to the next person. And then it's happened with almost all of our teachers. You hear these stories. I've heard numerous stories of this happening with Lama Zopa, with Choe Rinpoche, and with Choe Rinpoche. All these, you hear numerous stories about how one student, there'll be a line of students who make the offerings to them, right? And one student will give them something, and then they'll turn around and give it to the next student in line. But then the first student gets like, I gave that to you. Like, I wanted you to enjoy that. And you're like, well, then you didn't really give it. If that's the mind you had, you were still clinging on to it because you were giving it because you expected something, right? True generosity has no expectation. If you have expectation and then you're giving with reservation, so that's not real generosity. And it's the same, not just for giving material things, but for giving fearlessness or giving aid from harm and giving Dharma. You know, if I am giving a Dharma talk and I'm doing it because I expect something from you in return, that's not a type of generosity. That's a type of self-cherishing, right? That might look like generosity. And it may still benefit you, right? Same way, if I give you material things and I expect something out of you, you will still benefit possibly from those things, but my mind won't. We have to make sure our generosity is free from attachment, not only to whatever it is we're giving, but also to what we expect the results of that giving to be. That's first.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah. No, go ahead.
So, but like for the Dharma teaching that you said, if you are not going to be attentive to the result, you might, or anything for any generosity, if I'm not sort of not focused, but I'm not mindful of the result, my generosity might make no difference to the person that I am hoping to help or,
Yeah.
you know,
So-
benefit.
No, that's true. You have to be skillful and you have to be aware. So if you've come here because you want to learn Dharma and I give a teaching and I see that the way I'm teaching is not helping your minds at all, then that is a means for me to realize that the way I'm teaching or what I'm doing is not effective, right? So I should be attuned, especially in this case, to the result. And the same thing, if I'm giving material things and you say I'm hungry, I need food, and I'm like, here's new clothes. You know what I mean? So you should be attentive to how your offering is received, right? And to see if you're doing it in the most effective way possible. So that's true. But if I'm giving you a Dharma teaching because I want you to think I'm a great teacher and I want you to have respect for me as a Dharma teacher, that's different than saying I want you to improve your mind. And no matter how many Dharma teachings someone gives, you can't force a student to practice or to learn something, right? So if I say I'm only going to give teachings if you achieve realizations, then that's not the right way to go about teaching. But if I'm giving teachings and see no one here seems to be benefiting, for instance, here's a great example. I gave a 10-day course at Tushita in Dharamsala last year, maybe the year before. And it was a 10-day course. There were 150 students. It was an introductory course to Buddhism. And we had gotten about 2/3 of the way through when we were talking about emptiness. And when you talk about emptiness, there's a very famous analogy about a cart and how all the parts of the cart aren't the same as where a cart doesn't truly exist. It doesn't exist in parts, it doesn't exist separately, and so on. And it was the end of the day, and I talked through this, and I could just see that there was nothing. Like they had no clue. and either the way I was presenting it just wasn't hitting with them, and they were all tired probably about 2/3 into this retreat. So a combination of them being tired, being the end of the day, and me not being skillful in the way I presented it just meant that this was not useful, right? And so I got through it because we already started it. Then I came back the next day and I was like, so let's do that again. Let's find a new way to talk about this thing, because obviously what I had done wasn't skillful. So I was attentive to the results insofar as that it wasn't helping the students, but I wasn't attached to the students clinging on to my teaching as being the perfect proclamation of Dharma. So you do need to be attentive to results. It's not saying ignore results, but it's saying don't be attached to them and don't give things with expectations. Is that a little clearer? Yeah. So we can think in our lives, it might be hard to give every day. What can we give every day? How can we practice generosity? And I think one of the things we can do very easily is we give our practice. So every day we're actively working to better our minds, whether that be meditating every day, studying every day, a combination of that. That is something we can offer. We offer our teachers our practice. And that's a type of offering of the Dharma, right? It's saying I'm dedicating myself to improving my mind, to becoming a better human being. And that practice, whatever it is, no matter how small it is, I give that to my teachers and to all Buddhists in recognition of all they've done for me and all sentient beings. So that's the type of practice we can do all the time. And we remember since generosity is a mental practice, everything we eat, we can dedicate and give away. That's why we pray over our food and we make blessings of it. Before I consume food, I offer it to all the Buddhists. And I'm actually offering that food to the Buddhists. Now, most likely they're not going to come and take it, so I get to eat it. But if they were to come and take it, you'd be like, okay, I offer it. So you offer everything you can offer in that way. Things real and imagined. That's the power of our mind. So when we make offerings of water bowls, we're actually offering not just water bowls, not just water, but the practice of offering water bowls is you're offering water for washing your feet and for cooling drink to soothe your throat. But you're also offering incense and perfume and flowers and things that delight all the senses. But we're using water to substitute for them because that's the material we have at hand. And even if you can't lay out a whole altar of water bowls, Milarepa had one bowl in his cave that he ate from. And he would first fill that with water and offer it to the Buddhas. And then after that had been offered, then he'd use that bowl and clean it out and use it to eat his meal for the day, right? So you don't need elaborate things to make offerings. You need your mind to transform those offerings and say, I wish I had infinite amount of goods that I could offer all sentient beings to make them free. So we can do that. Every time we eat a meal, first you offer it to the Buddhas. Or you can offer it, Lama Zopa says, think of all the microbes in your body. All of the microscopic things that live in your body. Whether they're sentient or not, there's some debate, but there's definitely things in your body. And so you say, well, I offer this food to them so that they might be sustained as well.
Sorry, may I ask another question?
Of course.
So when you offer food, let's say, every day, you also then have to develop that awareness that the food which you are hungry, which you're looking forward to eat, someone might say, I want it and take it away. And, so like, if you just do it as a matter of, like a lot of us, like, you just have the habit of, saying a prayer. A lot of people do. But I know that if you took away that plate and said, so-and-so needs it and there isn't any left, even if they've said the prayer, if you take away their food, they're not going to be very happy. So then every time you sit down to eat, you have to also tell yourself that if this food at this point goes away for whatever reason, and I stay hungry for the next God only knows how many hours, I'm going to find it. That's what you're trying to do, right?
Yeah, that's what you're trying to do. You're right. And it's hard. It's much easier just to say the prayers as lip service, right? And to not mean it. So what we're trying to do, though, is to transform our mind. And so when we do it in small ways, then it becomes easier and easier and easier. For instance, there's a great story of, Lama Zopa, when he did blessings for food, they would last for hours. I sat through, he gave a teaching in Boston once, while I was still in Boston, before I ordained. And he gave teaching. He finished the teaching and he came to where we were staying. And I was staying there with him, and then the other management committee members were all there. And it was like midnight when we got there. And that's when food was served. Dinner was served at around midnight. And then it took an hour for him to do the blessings before we could eat, And that's the way it always goes with Rinpoche. I remember Richard Gere in an interview once said that the food is always blessed. It's cold, but it's blessed, you know? And then Venerable Raja tells a story of when they were on a plane once and they were offered food in the plane as part of a service. And Rinpoche spent the whole time blessing the food, that by the time he finished blessing it, they had to take it away because they were landing. And he said, it doesn't matter, we got the most important part. The blessing was more important, right? By giving it away. So that's what we're trying to do. You're right. It's just hard. So we do it in small ways now and become familiar with it, you know? But it isn't easy. That's true. That's why we're doing it now, though. That's why we're doing the smallest ways that we're comfortable with, you know? And then it gets easier and easier. And then it becomes second nature. So it no longer is something you have to think about. It's something we just do. Okay, let's try to move on a little bit more. Well, let's do one more before we cut for break, if you don't mind. I always take longer than I thought. Let's just talk a little bit about morality before we take tea break. So morality, they say, is like a cool breeze that relieves the suffering heat of samsara. Because morality is what truly develops contentment. When you are able to exist in your vows, especially, and exist in such a way that you are only dedicated to practicing virtue, then contentment is the natural result of that. You don't have to actively try to develop contentment because it comes naturally when you live only following the 10 virtues. When you don't have attachment, then it's easy to be content, right? So when you're not seeking out things that are not virtuous, it's easy to be content. And in many ways, we talk about morality as the basis, as I mentioned earlier, that if you want your other good qualities to grow, you need to have a field of morality. Morality, more accurately, we could say, is like pulling up the weeds, right? So no matter how many seeds you plant, if you don't have pure morality, then things might grow, but they're going to be choked out. But when you're able to till the soil, get rid of the rocks, get rid of the weeds, then you've created a place that your other good qualities, whether they be concentration, perseverance, discipline, wisdom, practice, meditation, you're giving them something to grow in. So in that way, morality, it serves as the basis. So morality is based in the mind of renunciation. We talked about this a little bit yesterday as well, for those of you who are here. Renunciation being a mind that doesn't give up the things in this life, but it gives up the mind that's attached to those things. It doesn't give up joy, it gives up attachment to worldly happiness. It doesn't say we can't have nice things, but it says that the nice things we have aren't real happiness. There's samsaric happiness that can benefit me now in some small way, but they're not true happiness. They're temporary happiness. True happiness is Buddhahood. The samsara is always samsara. The most amazing perfection in samsara, the most marvelous aspect of samsara is still samsara, which means it is dissatisfactory. It's suffering. I can find some temporary joy in it. We're not going to live grim, dark lives all the time. We can find light and joy and happiness, but it's not real happiness. So renunciation is recognizing that and saying that my goal is to have real happiness. And therefore, I want to be free from suffering, and therefore I won't accept samsara's happiness as real happiness. If I experience joy in samsara, I'll experience joy, I'll be content with it, but I'm not going to grasp onto it and pretend that this is real happiness, you know? So having that renunciation is the basis of morality. So renunciation we can see in everything we do during our day, you know, that whenever we find joy, is this something that we are doing that we're grabbing onto as making us really happy? Or is this just giving us a temporary type of happiness? Whatever that may be. So we have to find the balance. If we think just about the 10 non-virtuous actions, how many of those do we commit in a day, throughout the day? Most of us probably aren't going to be killing or engaging in sexual misconduct, so that we can knock those two off pretty easily. But we might kill, right? Insects and so forth, sometimes intentionally, sometimes not intentionally. But for the most part, killing, sexual misconduct. But then lying, how many times do we lie a day? Probably we won't steal that much, but we might. Sometimes just a little bit, you know, from your family member. If they expect something, you say, oh, this last piece of pizza I'm going to take, even though I know that they want it. That's not quite stealing, but it's parallel to stealing, right? Or how many times do we lie? We think I'm doing it for the better, for the good. It's a small lie. How many times a day do we engage in non-virtuous activity? Even we say it's a small one, I'm doing it with good intentions, still non-virtuous. And most of us will find that we do it a lot throughout the day. Maybe in small ways. I'm not saying big ways. But so as long as we're doing that, we're not practicing morality. So if we can take time to look at our day, at any moment when we see a non-virtuous mind arising, we work to eliminate it, then that's practicing morality. But as I said, practicing morality, there's a type of morality that is also not just avoiding non-virtue, but engaging in virtue and developing our mind so it's ripe for the Dharma. So when you engage in virtuous activity, it's also practicing morality, right? So it's not only about stopping, it's also about going forward. You're stopping negative actions in order to replace those negative actions with positive actions. So in that way, having morality is more than one. It is not just about negating something. Everything we do to benefit others, we can do it with the practice of morality, and that will make it more pure or more powerful, which is why having vows is so powerful. So anyone who has lay vows, right, has taken the vow not to kill, not to steal, not to lie, not to engage in sexual misconduct, and ideally not to consume intoxicants. Dalai Lama often jokes when he's in the West and he gives lay vows. He said, Westerners are very accustomed to drinking wine and beer. So maybe you just drink a half glass instead of a full glass. But ideally, not taking any intoxicants is a vow. So someone who has those 5 lay vows, and then on top of that might have the Bodhisattva vows, and then on top of that might have the Tantric vows. All those vows make your actions more powerful, right? It's like the difference between not killing something and having a vow not to kill it are worlds different. Because one of those is an actual activity. I take a vow every day not to kill. So then when I don't kill things, it's not just accidental. It's an intentional action of not causing harm to the best of my ability. So that practice becomes more powerful. It creates more merit. It creates a habit that's deeper in my mind. So then it becomes easier and easier in the future. So it's like that with all of our virtuous activity, and all of our vows have that same action, that same result. So vows are how we practice morality in the immediate sense. So as a lay person, we might have the Pratimoksha vows. There are 5 for lay people, 36 for a novice monk or nun, 253 for a fully ordained monk. And that's part of the reason they say that ordained Sangha are objects of great merit, because a pure member of the Sangha is holding more vows than a lay person. Now, it's a double-edged sword, because if you're holding those vows but not doing it well, then that's more negativity, right? But if there's a Sangha member who is holding pure vows, then by the power of their vows alone, their actions are more powerful. So that can be inspiring for lay people to realize I can take Pratimoksha vows, the 5 vows of a lay person, and that makes my practice more powerful. I can take the Bodhisattva vows, right? The 18 vows and the 46 secondary vows, and that makes my practice more powerful. And then if I have the right teachers, I can take the Tantric vows, and that makes everything I do more powerful. Even if it's not related to those vows, but having those vows in my continuum makes everything more powerful. So how can we practice morality in our everyday life? I think this is pretty common sense, right? So I won't go too deep into it, but even think of the way you relate to your friends and your family when you're at home. What can you do to be engaging in virtuous activity? Any of that is going to be practicing morality. And anything to avoid non-virtuous activity is practicing morality. And that includes, unfortunately, one of the 10 non-virtues that people have the hardest time with. I have the hardest time with gossiping. People love, and also known as idle chatter, right? Not just gossiping, but idle chatter.
That includes like entertainment, endlessly watching.
Well, this is where, right? So it includes entertainment, which also is a type of laziness. But so what we have to do, this I was going to talk more about with perseverance, but since we're about to take a break, I guess I'll mention it now. The goal, what I think is important, we live in the world. So we need to be able to relate to the things in the world and use them as part of our spiritual practice. So maybe it's a little different for someone who's a monk and lives in a monastery, but you can't expect lay people to not watch TV or listen to music or read books, right? Because that is part of the life of a lay person. And so how can you do those activities, but do it with the Dharma mind? How can you engage in that practice? And you had a long day at work or a long day at school and you just need to relax, right? And you want to turn on Netflix for an hour and just not be focused. Can you do that, but with the mind of Dharma? And say, what am I Am I doing this just to turn off my mind? Or can I find some Dharma practice in this? You know? I was just listening to a song this morning as I was getting dressed, and it is not a song or a type of music that you would consider Dharma in general. It's kind of loud, aggressive music. And he has a line that said, I'm always infected by the sharp and unending thirst. I'm always seeking for comfort that I can never attain. I'm poisoned by my thirst for change. And so I hear that, and that's Dharma, right? I can use that sentiment in my practice. I probably won't present it the same way they do in this music, which, like I said, is loud and jarring. But that sentiment is something, even in pop culture, I can listen to pop culture and say, that's a Dharma idea. That gives me something to meditate on, right? So we can engage in.
Also helps you relate to other people, then you can discuss things.
Well, exactly. Well, that's the benefit of studying pop culture, is that you have things to talk about. And so if, I know in many Dharma centers, they try to start book clubs. Not many, I've seen it numerous times, and they almost always want to talk about Dharma books that are books about meditation or things like this, or even like a book about the 6 perfections. And that's great. Like, it's wonderful to discuss this book with other Dharma students. It really is. But also, any of you could read this book and understand it, right? But what about we read a sci-fi book or something and apply Dharma to that book and then have a discussion about that? For me, I think that's more powerful, because you're not going to go out into the world with this. I am, because I'm a monk. This is my life, right? Most people don't do that. You have to deal with the world, and that involves pop culture. So if we want to make our lives a spiritual practice, then we have to learn how to engage in pop culture in a spiritual way. But it is easy to just let it be pure entertainment that is turning off our minds. And if we're not careful, increasing our attachment or our desire. When you watch violent action movies and you get excited by the violence and not sad about the violence, then you're like, okay, So it's a balance. And you can easily be like, oh, no, I'm doing Dharma. And this is you eat your popcorn and watch your movies. So it is possible, but it's not something you do mindlessly. It's something we have to do with a mind of intention. But so, to sum up really quickly about morality and the idea of watching mindless entertainment can actually be a spiritual practice where we are learning about morality, is because if we know how the 10 non-virtues and other acts of morality exist in our life, you can see how others engage in those actions and the results of them. And that gives you something to meditate on. So even though it's not a practice of morality, it's an opportunity to meditate on morality when you see it happening around you in that way, Okay, there's more to talk about that, but let's take a break. I've gone on longer than I meant to. Let's stretch our legs, have tea, maybe a little coffee. We'll come back in 10 minutes. We'll continue. I do have meditation I want to do. We'll see. We might have to do like a abbreviated version of it if I talk too long, but we'll get there. Okay, thank you. So let's continue and see how much more we can get through today before we do our meditation practice. So we talked a little bit about incorporating charity into our everyday lives and how that can make our lives more buoyant by getting rid of our attachment to possessions, including attachment to our own body. We can make our lives become less weighed down in that way. We talked about morality. Increasing our practice of morality, we create a fertile ground for all other good qualities to grow. We create a natural level of contentment because we've gotten rid or we've tamped down minds of attachment and self-cherishing. And we talk about how morality itself magnifies everything we do to be more powerful, which is why holding pure vows, whatever level of vows we can hold, makes all of our activities steeped in virtue, more powerful in that way. Strong morality brings about a level of intentionality to our actions, right? Because like I said, it's not merely not engaging in non-virtue, but it's also actively pursuing virtue. So it brings intentionality to everything we do. And so next we'll talk a little bit about patience.
Do you think I could ask a question about my?
I think you could ask a question about morality. That'd be great.
So, what you said about making your about Netflix, okay, like that's the. But by seeking morality in art and music and literature, aren't we just questioning the whole practice of these forms of expression for human beings, which give the listener or the reader so much pleasure? I mean,
Well, I think what is the, I mean, this is a more existential question, but what is the point of art in general, right? What is the point of art? And I'm not an artist, but I do consume art. I think the point of art is to make you feel something, right? It's to make the audience engage with, when this can be art, any type of art, whether it be movie, film, classical, painting, any kind of art. You want to invoke something, a feeling. It could be a feeling of repulsion. It could be a feeling of attraction. It could be a meditation on something. It could be anything. So you want to evoke something in the consumer of the art, right, in the audience. And I think that we can engage in any artistic endeavor in such a way as to not only experience those emotions, but do them with a Dharma mind. So that's the goal. But yeah, I do think we should question these things. I think art is one of the incredible types of communication that we've developed as humans have evolved. I was just listening to a science podcast yesterday that discovered a new cave painting that was a little over 50,000 years old, which isn't the oldest they've discovered, but this one they actually believed it was telling a narrative because there were two paintings side by side that were slightly different. And so they believed it was one of the earliest indications of narrative art that has been captured over 50,000 years old. So this, not in India, no. I don't remember where it was. But so this is something we've been doing for a long time, is realizing that our mere language may not be able to capture the full breadth of the human experience. So we use alternative ways to do that. And I think art is great for that because you can look at a great piece of art and it just does something to you that you can't explain. Especially if you look at like abstract artists and people like Rothko and other type of painting that doesn't have a clear form, but it evokes something in you for some reason, right? So I think art is powerful that way. I think as someone engaging in a spiritual practice, we can still consume that art and participate in a relationship with it in such a way as to say, what is this evoking in me and why? And how do these things affect me, you know? So I read a lot. I don't watch a lot of TV or movies these days, but I do read a lot. I think last year I read 140 books, give or take, not counting my studies. And a lot of what I read is genre. So I read horror, sci-fi, fantasy. So why do I read horror books? What's the point of reading something so terrifying? You learn what is it that repulses you. And then you say, well, why does this repulse me? Maybe it's because it's violence and that turns me away, or maybe it's something else. Maybe it's triggering something deeper in me, right? Or I look at tangent, so I won't go too long into it, but you look at something and you see, I feel sympathy for the monster in this. Why am I sympathetic towards the monster? How do I, in my experience of this life, feel like a monster? You know, and how does that affect the way I live in the world? So art gives you a way to examine your mind, because you're constantly reacting to art, right? It's not static. And so if you're reacting to it, you say, why am I reacting this way? And so I don't think that undermines art. I think that's the goal of art, is to give you something to think about. But as a spiritual practitioner, instead of just accepting it at face value, you then take the extra step to say, why am I reacting in this way to this piece of art? What is being triggered in my mind? And how can I use this to then overcome negative emotions and to make my mind more flexible, more pliant, and more devoted to virtue, to spiritual life?
Okay, I read a lot of history and current affairs. But I know why I read it. I read it because I want to understand the world around me. But that's not a practice. I just want to engage better,
That
understand.
is a practice. So why do you want to be able to engage in the world? That is a...
Can I try some
Sure.
introduction, because I read. And you read something which is so ghastly. Kind of makes you want to vote for something. Make someone say, pick up choices.
Yeah, I mean, you said yourself that you want to learn about the world, right? And that affects how you live in the world. It affects how you treat other people. It affects how you understand current events, right? And so understanding history in that way, if that's something you enjoy pursuing, is a practice, or it can be, because it affects the way you live in the world. It's not just something you do to zone out and get away from everything, right? So, and I'm not saying everyone that consumes art is doing it in a spiritual way. That's the danger, is that it's easy. And if you're talking about history and other nonfiction sources, it's a little different. But engaging in pop culture can also be a way to turn off your mind and to increase all of your negative minds, right? Sex and violence are what sells 90% of pop culture. It's easy to engage in that and find yourself more lustful, more excited, more agitated. Like, that is easy. That's the point of a lot of pop culture. That's how they want to get you in. So if that's all you're doing and you're mindlessly being non-critical and letting your emotions get riled up, then that's not a healthy way to engage in those things. And so for some people, that's the only way they can engage with it. You know, like, you know, they know that if I watch this type of TV show, I'm going to get excited. I'm going to whatever. And so I just can't engage with it because my mind isn't trained in such a way that that'll be helpful for me, right? So we have to know our minds in that way. So it's not something that everyone should be doing. But I think that if we live in the world, especially lay people living in the world and trying to be part of the world, not living in a cave somewhere, being able to understand what is around you, this is just another tool that some people can use. And I know for me, you know, samsara is hard, right? That's the truth of it. Like, life is hard. You know, being free from samsara is difficult. It's lifetimes and lifetimes and lifetimes of practice. We've been doing this since beginningless time, and we're still here. Okay. So we're doing the best we can do. And sometimes that means I need to go home and listen to music for an hour because I have too much going on in my mind. So at least if I can try to find a intentional way to do that, then I'm not just wasting that time. So I'm using that time to say, I know that, like, I'm too stressed out right now. I need to do something to not be stressed out. And listening to this album will do that. So on one hand, it's a little bit escapist, but maybe I can have a little bit of intentionality with it. And I can set a motivation that I'm doing this because I want to be able to serve others. And right now I can't because I'm too stressed out. So if I can create a positive motivation and try to have some intentionality, then I can make it a spiritual practice. If we're Buddhists or Bodhisattvas, we wouldn't have to do this, right? It would be natural, but we're not. We're still working towards that. We live in samsara, which is hard. So we do the best we can do. And sometimes that means Netflix, you know? When you think of how long we've been suffering in samsara, and how long we've been trying fruitlessly to be free from suffering, it's mind-blowing. So any opportunity we have to progress in the path is so incredibly rare and powerful that we need to do whatever we can to make use of that. But that means understanding our minds and understanding that if we push too hard and we burn out and it makes us not want to practice anymore, then that wasn't skillful, you know? I know people that got really excited by meditating, and so they went and did retreats and they burned out because they weren't ready for a one month retreat, and they just stopped, you know, because it like broke them, you know, just because they weren't ready for it. So we need to know our limits. We should always be trying to be better, always pushing ourselves, right? That's part of perseverance if we get to it. But we also have to recognize that we're not perfect. So we do the best we can do. And we use what tools we have available to us to always improve our minds. And we have to be compassionate with ourselves and recognize that my goal is to be free from suffering. True self-compassion is renunciation. It's getting rid of the mind that's attached to samsara and happiness. But I also have to be realistic and know what my limits are. And I push on them gently so they get wider and wider over time. But I don't just go running willy-nilly and ignoring it, you know? If I were to try to run a marathon tomorrow, I would probably die, right? But I could probably run a 2K. And then maybe if I kept doing that, I could run a 5K. And then if I kept going, you know, I could run a marathon. But if I tried to do that tomorrow, actually, if I tried to run a 2K tomorrow, I'd probably die, let's be honest. But the point still stands, right? Like we can build up our perseverance and our ability to do things. And it's the same with spiritual practice.
We retain and you have to achieve the perseverance that we've built up. Do we retain that in our next birth or do we start from scratch?
I mean, the very fact that we are born as human beings with access to Dharma, perfect human rebirth, is a result of our past virtuous activities, right? One of the main causes for human rebirth is morality, actually. So that's why it's so important. But all of the six practices, the six perfections that we practice, create imprints in our mind. They create habits. So when you study karma, one of the rules of karma, or one of the results of karma, is that it has a result that's similar to its cause and habit. So the more habituated you become in this life to engaging in virtuous activity, whatever it may be, including perseverance, moral ethic, moral discipline, any virtuous activity, the easier that is to do in the future because you've created the imprints for it. So in future lives, you will have a tendency to do those same things because you've already done a lot of the work. Which is why in this life, we've met people that when they when they learn something, they learn it right away, right? And we say that's because in past lives, they've already created that habit, maybe stronger than I have. And this can be for worldly things like picking up, you know, musical instruments or a new language or something, or it can be for studying a topic that like they study this topic and it just makes sense to them right away. That's because in the past lives, they have already done that. And so yes, by engaging this now, we are ideally improving our lives right now, but we're also creating more and more positive conditions that in the future, all this will be easier, you know? And we can rejoice the fact that we're even have perfect human rebirths and access to the Dharma that we can study and practice now, no matter how difficult it is an incredible source of joy. And it means that in the past, we did something right? And so now instead of wasting that opportunity, we use it to plant more positive seeds for future lifetimes. But so it doesn't go away, you know? Our spiritual practice is the only thing that continues with us after we die. It's the only thing that's of any benefit at the moment of death, and it's the only thing that comes with us is our spiritual practice, or our lack thereof, in both ways.
How do verbs work in terms of the law of karma? Like we are collecting virtue even when we are speaking.
So how do vows work in terms of karma?
And so that you said the intention.
So vows, if the vows are strong enough in your continuum, then every action you do is combined with those vows. So even when sleeping, you can be creating positive karma because your mind is so active when you're asleep. For most of us, that's not going to be the case because most of us, our vows either aren't that strong or we don't have control over that mind. It's too willy-nilly. We're also not creating negative karma while we sleep. There is some debate about this. There's a whole series of debates we did about if you kill someone in a dream, can you still experience some sort of negative karma from engaging in that action? And there are debates about it. But so for most of us, the way vows work related to karma is that the vows just amplify our other good qualities and our other virtue and non-virtue, right? Because when we talk about karma, there's two types of karma. There's the karma of basically setting an intention, and then there's the karma that accompanies action. And the karma that accompanies action has three types: body, speech, and mind. All have different types of karma associated with it, but they're all preceded by karma as well. That's like a motivational karma. And because of that, every single action we do, a body, speech, and mind, is preceded by a mental action, which is to say there's a mental karma that precedes everything we do. So by having vows, they are creating the riper space for our actions to be more virtuous. But in the same way, if we take those vows, which actually exist as subtle types of mental form in our continuum, if we take those vows and we then break them, then it's causing more negativity, right? Which is the double-edged sword of a vow, is that they magnify our activities. They magnify the results of our karma because there's like bonus points, so they can go up or down. Yeah.
Now, I mean, some of the qualities which brought us up the pyramid was basically our use of the thumb and becoming biped from quadruped. By the same token, it was language
Mhm.
and communication, which was especially very important when we were nomads. Now, when you are exchanging information, you could call that as gossip, or it could be just an. So it boils down to intention or motivation. If it is not meant to harm anybody else, or cause suffering to anybody else, I mean,
Mhm.
so many issues are wrong.
Yeah.
It depends on how you put it.
Well, like you said, the way things appear from the outside is not as important as the way they actually
Exactly.
exist.
Your intentions.
right? But so idle chatter and gossip isn't just about being malicious. It's also about recognizing that if you're expending time engaging in non-virtue, or taking time where you could be engaging in virtue and instead of wasting it, that is non-virtuous,
Yeah,
right?
because sometimes I
But-
mean, just do a small talk with a person and like somebody is, why are you wasting time? But it's just like I'm trying to break through that person to make that person be comfortable.
Yeah, so when we look at what we mean when we define idle chatter or gossip, it isn't only talking about non-dharma things, right? So there is definition to it. If we look at the 10, we won't go into it now, but when you study karma and its effects, and then you study the 10 non-virtues, every one of the 10 non-virtuous activities, they'll say, what is the basis for it? What is the action? What is the motivation and the completion? So it's not just one particular thing. So which is why when we're walking down the street and we step on insects and kill them, we may have we engage in the negative action of killing, but it's not a complete action because we had no intention and so forth, right? So it's the same with idle chatter or gossip, you know? One of the ways of attracting students is by saying nice words, right? Because you want to bring people in and make them feel comfortable, you know? So there's benefit to it.
Yeah, intention.
Let's try to get through the other 4, at least briefly. We may not have time to meditate, but we'll see. So talking about patience as being the antidote to anger. I think when we understand the self-cherishing mind, that makes patience a lot easier. So the self-cherishing mind, right? The mind always seeking gain, seeking popularity, seeking pleasure, and so forth, seeking your own benefit, and trying to avoid suffering, trying to avoid being criticized. That self-cherishing mind, when someone engages in an act of harm toward you, when an enemy, so-called, does something harmful toward you, what really happens is the enemy is just the conditions. And it's your self-cherishing mind reacting to that. That is what causes your anger, right? When someone insults me, it's my own sense of pride and my self-cherishing mind that doesn't want to be insulted, that thinks I'm so special. That's what's causing my anger. The other person just had words, right? But it's my own negative mind that's then taking those words. So the words created the condition, but it's my mind that then turned them into anger. Other people don't make us angry. We make ourselves angry. Other people create the conditions where it may be very easy to become angry sometimes, and understandably so, given the difficulties of the world, but that never brings benefit, right? And so when you can realize that, and you realize how pernicious the self-cherishing mind is, and how that anger is actually coming from ourselves, and is only harming ourselves. When someone insults me and I get angry about it, that doesn't affect them in any way. It doesn't make them not insult me in the future or not insult others. It doesn't make them realize what they did was wrong. It just causes me harm. And then if I act on that anger, even more harm, right? So when we realize that, we realize how dangerous the self-cherishing mind is, then patience becomes a lot easier. Because we can see that it's not from the outside this anger is coming, but from the inside. That the real enemy is the self-cherishing mind. It doesn't exist outside of us. That's the important thing to recognize. And when we can think about that, then it makes patience much easier to cultivate. I think patience is one of the I think anger is something that pervades our lives very easily. We're very quick to anger in this day and age. It's kind of, we're sold anger as a way to create group identity, right? And so anger is used as a tool. And because we have a habituation to it, I think, in this degenerate time right now, anger is just something we're habituated to. And so for me, it is one of those times where having a couple of verses from different prayers that I find motivating are something I can keep in my back pocket. So when I feel anger coming, especially mind training verses about recognizing, giving the victory to others and take defeat upon myself, or verses that remind me that no matter the difficulties, being stressed about it is not going to help. If there's nothing I can do to change it. So from the Bodhidharma, things like that. These verses, when I'm in the midst, if I feel this anger coming, then I recite those verses to myself, and I remind myself by doing so of all of the disadvantages of anger. And that allows me to develop this patience in response to that anger and to not act without thinking, So this is especially since anger is so prevalent, at least it has been in my life, and I see it in a lot of contemporary society, that like trying to find any shortcuts we can to get away, to undercut that anger is really, really powerful and useful. First, we have to be able to recognize our anger, though, which is why all these six work together. Having concentration, being able to meditate so you have some understanding of your mind is important, Before you can stop your anger, you have to realize that you're under the control of anger. That's one of the that's one of the difficulties when you start meditating. When you start meditating, you're very new to it. You start trying to focus on your mind. You feel like you're making great progress because you become more in tune with your mind. You see when there are more distractions. You see when the emotions are acting up. And so you feel like you're getting some level of control. And then at some point, everything feels like you've gone backwards and it gets a lot worse. And it feels like there's so many more emotions and stray thoughts running around. And you say, what? I thought I was making progress. What's going on? And it can be demoralizing. But what's really happening is all of those thoughts were happening all the time. But your mind just wasn't focused enough to see it. So all you were seeing was the very coarse, grossest thoughts running around. And now that you've developed a stronger sense of meditation or a stronger awareness of your mind, then the more subtle experiences of negative emotions or of wild thoughts become clearer to you. But it feels like you're going backwards. Right? But what it's really doing is like peeling off the layer and seeing there's a whole lot more to go, So you have to be ready for that when you start a meditative practice to know that it doesn't all go, it can be very roller coaster like that. But so when you're able to see the anger before it starts, then you can develop patience that doesn't retaliate when you're harmed. So that's the most important part of patience. But then again, as we said, accepting suffering. So in a very coarse way, again, not glorifying suffering, not saying suffering is something we should run toward, but when we experience it, being realistic and saying, this is something I'm experiencing, I'm willing to experience it now because I can't avoid it. And by doing that, that's a type of patience. So that can be in a bigger picture where there's suffering we experience in our lives that we just can't avoid. So instead of fighting against them, we say, this is unavoidable. It's the nature of samsara, suffering. So why am I going to get emotionally distressed about this? I may be in physical pain, and that's the way it is. And so I do my best to mediate it however I can, but I can't run away from it. If you can take some medicine or some surgery, that's different, but you accept it. And by accepting that suffering, it doesn't get rid of physical pain, but what it does is it gets rid of the emotional anguish that is accompanying that pain, right? Or we can say accepting suffering is like I mentioned before, I know that if I'm going to attend the Dharma teaching that's 4 hours long, I'm going to be done, I'm going to be stiff at the end. But I'm more than willing to do that because the benefit of that Dharma teaching is more important, right? Or if I go to a puja, a long puja, it's a few hours long. I know that I'm going to have to stretch a little bit at the end, but that's the type of suffering I'm willing to endure because the benefits are much greater, Not putting myself in harm's way. I'm not saying that, but recognize that there's some slight discomfort that I can endure and that will make my life better. And again, we look at people that are pursuing worldly things, such as athletes, and they're willing to throw their bodies through a meat grinder to be better at whatever their particular, athletic form is. And if they can do that for things like athletics, surely we can do something similar for our spiritual practice, And again, know your body. I'm not saying hurt yourself. I'm not saying actively seek out pain, but I'm saying if you're in a position where there's slight discomfort that's not going to cause long-term damage, then you can maybe sit with that discomfort and just accept it, I know at least a lot of Westerners aren't used to sitting on the ground. We're not used to sitting cross-legged. And so when you teach meditation to Westerners, you get about 5 minutes in, and then after that, there's this constant movement because they're just not used to it, and they're not used to discomfort. But like sitting like this, for most people, you can do for quite a while and not cause like damage, you know? But you're just so unused to it that there's like constant discomfort. You say, just sit with the discomfort, you know? Sit with it. It's okay. You're not hurting your body. You're just gonna have to stretch a little bit afterwards. Maybe stretch beforehand. That will help, you know? I remember once when I first came to India, it was in 2005. I was in school. I was studying, and I was on a study abroad program. I lived for 6 months in Chennai. And we studied all sorts of things, but we studied Yoga Sutra, and we had a yoga asana course, and it was with the TSK Desikachar and his lineage of yoga teachers. And one of the students with us was an athlete. He was like the most fit of all of us. I think he played lacrosse or something. So he was very, very fit. And he could not, for the life of him, sit cross-legged, just because the way the muscles in his legs were. He would sit down and his legs couldn't go more than this, just because he was not used to it. And they'd come and he'd like push his legs like this, and then they just jump up like this, because he just was so unaccustomed to even sitting like this. But he was in great shape and he was very strong, but he just wasn't accustomed to this type of muscle placement. His body wasn't used to it, so it was uncomfortable for him. But he learned to sit with that discomfort because he was getting benefit out of course. So that's the type of patience we can cultivate. Again, not seeking out harm, but being patient, accepting suffering, recognizing that suffering is the nature of samsara. And therefore, if there's suffering that's unavoidable, instead of lamenting it and creating mental anguish, accepting it, and then moving on. And then lastly, the last type of patience is the patience that has certainty with the Dharma. So when we study the teachings of the Buddha, we develop some confidence that these teachings are the way to free ourselves from suffering and to become Buddhas. That's a type of patience. So developing conviction that these teachings are beneficial. That's a type of patience as well. So moving on to perseverance. I don't think we're going to have time to meditate today. Let's see. So perseverance, as I mentioned, is rejoicing in virtue, right? Developing a mind of rejoicing and finding joy in virtuous activity. And that rejoicing, that joy, is what then catapults you to get through difficult times and experiences to keep practicing virtue. So the one interesting thing about perseverance is that, I don't know if interesting is that word, but it's not always virtuous. We can persevere in negative actions, right?
Yes.
You can see that when someone insults you and you hold a grudge for years and years and years, that's perseverance, or at least a worldly perseverance, right? And we've seen that in our lives. So perseverance by itself as a concept isn't always beneficial, but we need to be persevering towards virtue, right? So that's an important point. Some of these minds that we have are what are called changeable, which is depending upon their object, they can be virtuous or non-virtuous. Regret is an instance. If you regret engaging in a harmful or non-virtuous action, that regret is a virtuous mind. But if you regret engaging in a virtuous action, then that regret isn't non-virtuous, right? So some of these are changeable. Unlike killing, which is always negative and always harmful, there are some minds that, depending upon the object, can be virtuous or non-virtuous. And so perseverance is like that. You can persevere in your anger. You can persevere in your delusions. So that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to persevere in our virtue. So the first type of perseverance they call armor-like perseverance. So what that is that's not engaging in the non-virtuous activities. And it's called armor-like because when you develop the mind that avoids non-virtuous activity, it is like putting on armor and protecting yourself from attacks from the outside of other non-virtuous, of non-virtues, right? So it's just like a soldier goes into battle, they're going to put on armor to protect themselves from weapons, from their enemies. We put on the armor to protect ourselves from our non-virtuous minds. But the way we do that is by actively abandoning non-virtuous behavior and adopting virtuous behavior. And then even when things are difficult and we experience suffering, persevering through that as a means to develop virtuous minds. So that's why it's called armor-like perseverance. But similar, we also have the perseverance of gathering virtue and the perseverance of working for others. So those are very similar to patience in that way, that whenever we engage in in positive actions, that is a type of perseverance, especially if we take joy in engaging in virtue, if we rejoice. Rejoicing is a type of perseverance because it makes it easier to engage in virtue in the future. The important thing we talk about usually with perseverance, instead of the three types of perseverance, are the three types of laziness. Because perseverance is the antidote or supreme antidote to laziness. And so I think it's important to understand the three types of laziness. The first one is sometimes called lethargy or sometimes called procrastination. And this is what most of us think about when we think about laziness. Just like not wanting to do something, so putting it off and not doing it. But then the next two types of laziness are uncommon. So the next one is the laziness of engaging in non-dharmic activities. So you actually are excited to do things. So it looks like the opposite of laziness, but it's excited towards non-dharma. We call that a type of laziness. And perseverance, rejoicing in virtue, is what helps cut that laziness off at the root, right? So actively seeking out non-dharma activities is a type of laziness. But then the third type is the laziness of self-doubt or self-critique. So it's the kind of laziness that says, well, I'm too new of a student, I'm not good at meditating, so I'm just not going to do that practice. Or I'm not good enough to do it, so I'm just going to leave that till another time. Because I'm not strong enough, I'm not smart enough, I don't have enough skills like this. So instead of pursuing Dharma actively, we say, I'll leave it till later because I don't have what it takes. That kind of self-doubt, that self-criticism is a type of laziness. Now, it's true, not all of us at this moment are equipped to engage in all the different dharmic activities, meditations, practices like this, right? That's true. But we can still work toward them, right? And just saying, I'm not good enough, therefore I won't do it, is actually a type of self-cherishing mind. You're feeding your ego. You're not actually being skillful. So that's a type of laziness. And joy in virtue, that perseverance that says, even when obstacles arise, I am going to seek out virtue, that helps overcome that laziness, that self-doubt, okay? So I think those three types of laziness are important to think about. Because the first one, at least in my life, the first one is easy to recognize. Even if I'm not able to kind of nip it in the bud right away, I at least know when I'm being lazy in that way, right? It's very clear. But the other two are more insidious. You don't think about them as much. You think sometimes I'm being genuine. I'm just not good enough for that. So I'm not going to do it. I don't want to look like a fool. I don't want to get in others' way. I don't want to embarrass myself or my friends. I'm just going to leave that out alone and do it later. Or, maybe next year when I'm stronger or when I'm a better meditator, then I'll go on that retreat, right? And again, be skillful, know your limits. I'm not saying just go do the craziest things, but what I'm saying is those are the insidious minds that we need to be careful of. And it's a type of laziness that is overcome by having joy and virtue. And so how do we incorporate perseverance into our everyday life, right? If we think, and I think rejoicing, and to some extent, like gratitude, I think, the contemporary new age way of understanding rejoicing is gratitude journals, which I think is phenomenal. It's so, I don't know, you said something you see at least a lot in the West in contemporary therapy is advocating for, is people write gratitude journals. So every day you just go through and you list things that you did that day, that you experienced, that you are grateful for, right? And that's not a Buddhist practice anymore. It's a secular practice that you see a lot in the West. And that transforms your mind to realize how many blessings and joys you have in your life, right? And so it's the same with rejoicing. That's a type of rejoicing. So every day, you can spend any time of the day finding things in your life that are opportunities to rejoice, because we rejoice in virtue, right? It doesn't have to be our own virtue. When we see other people doing good things, you can rejoice in them, whether they be a teacher, one of our teachers, or just another person. When you see someone giving money to a homeless person or an unhoused person, you can say, I rejoice in their generosity. Now, we don't know their minds, we don't know their intentions, but from our side, they're doing an act of kindness. That's an opportunity to rejoice, right? So we can rejoice in our own virtuous behavior and others' virtuous behavior as well. And it can be the virtuous behavior that's very small, very, very simple, or it can be these grand things. But we see in our day, during our day, everything we do, there's opportunities for rejoicing. And there's opportunities to find joy in virtue. So this is something we bring with us throughout our whole day. another type of perseverance that we can do throughout the day, and again, this applies to our worldly experiences as well as our Dharma experience, is that when we're trying to improve our minds and our lives, whether that be our Dharma practice or we're trying to learn a new skill, a worldly skill, whatever it may be, we can be content with whatever progress we're making and not expect us to be perfect immediately, right? When we take on a new activity, we're not going to be experts at it right away. So if we can be content with any progress we make, as long as we're moving in the right direction, that's a type of perseverance. And we can see that in our regular everyday life. It doesn't only apply to our Dharma practice. So we can try to develop perseverance in that way. And the last thing about perseverance I'll say is that one of the things I've taken from the practice of perseverance that I often include in my introductory courses is that perseverance encourages us to adopt what are called the 3 attitudes. There is the long view, which is recognizing that our goal is Buddhahood, and that's not going to happen immediately. Okay. And because of that, we'd be content with whatever small progress we make, recognizing that our goal is much bigger, but it takes us a long time to get there. So that's the long view. And then there is the extensive view, the extensive thought, which is recognizing that there are many different elements and pieces that go into achieving the goal of Buddhahood. It's not just one thing. So there are many different practices we're going to have to do. Okay, we can't expect to have one panacea, this one thing that will fix everything. We know that due to our karma and delusions, we have to engage in numerous practices to undo the negative mind stream. So not only do we have to have the long view, right, which is saying that our goal is very far away, but we're always working towards it slowly and we're content with the progress we make. We have an extensive view that says there are many different aspects of this. I'm not going to understand all of them right away, but I'm still going to put effort into understanding them as best I can, acknowledging that some things will be more difficult for me. And so those will take more energy and I may not succeed at first, but they're part of this process. And then in top of the long view and the extensive view, we have the view of relaxation. I'm not going to become a Buddha tomorrow. If I expect it, I'm always going to be unhappy. So I have to maintain this long-term perseverance and a mind of relaxation that says I'm always pushing myself, but I'm not going to let myself get burned out. And again, if you look at this in a worldly way, look at long-distance runners, right? People that run marathons or ultra marathons, they don't sprint the whole time because you can't. You have to pace yourself. You have to know these are my limits. If this is the goal, I have to do it in a smart way. And it's the same thing with our practice. So we have to have the long view, we have to have the extensive view, and we have to do it with a mind of relaxation. Not laziness, but relaxation. And that, if you ever meet a Tibetan and you're stressed out about anything and you ask for advice, the very first thing they're going to say to you is, relax. That's the very first piece of advice you're going to get from almost any Tibetan when you're stressed out. Doesn't matter what it is. When I was home taking care of my mother who was dying of cancer, my teacher would call me, and the 2 things he would say is, relax, don't stress out, don't be worried, right? Those are the only 2 pieces of advice he gave me. Relax, relax, and don't stress out.
That's Tibetan.
Yeah, that's Tibetan. It's so ingrained in Tibetan culture that the formal way, not formal, but like the common way, if you're visiting someone and you leave, then instead of saying goodbye, the way they say goodbye is they say kale pe, which means go slowly. Kale means slow. So in addition to lele, you say kale, means slowly, slowly. That's the other big advice you get from Tibetans. So when you leave someone's house, let's say kale pe, go slowly. And your answer is kale shu, remain slowly. Right? So that's a very Tibetan way of understanding things. But so this relaxed view is important, right? It's so easy to be overwhelmed. And a lot of that overwhelm is we do it to ourselves. Samsara is overwhelming enough without our help. We don't have to make it more overwhelming. Okay. So that's part of understanding perseverance. And so we're almost out of time. I'm going to go through the last 2 really quickly. I don't think we'll have time to meditate today. I apologize. The last 2 are concentration and wisdom. So wisdom is the most difficult one. I won't do much on it. But when we study emptiness, we can learn how even a small taste of emptiness can affect our everyday life. So emptiness meaning recognizing that nothing exists inherently. It doesn't exist the way it appears to us, right? That's the important part to take away. That my experiences of the world are filtered through my delusional mind and my grasping at things as if they truly exist the way they appear to my deluded mind. And as long as I realize that, not necessarily realizing emptiness, but realizing that I have a mind that grasps at things as if they were true, then when I experience difficulty in my life or joy in my life, I realize there's nothing inherent about that that is difficult or joyful. That is my projecting this idea upon it, you know? So we often have we use the example of friends, enemies, and strangers, right? Who are objects of our desire, objects of our anger, and objects of our ignorance. But that label of friend, enemy, and stranger is something we project upon them based upon our limited experiences of this life. It has nothing to do with them, right? There's nothing inherent about that person that makes them an enemy. And we can say most people that we consider enemies or people that harm us have robust family lives and people who love them and care about them. So that idea of enemy is only the way we relate to them, but not the way they exist inherently in the world, right? But we look at them as if that is their identity. And the same goes for people we care about that bring us joy or happiness, that we're attached to, that arouse our attachment and desire. We look at them as they are an object of attachment. That's what they are. So we project these inherent qualities on them, right? And then instead of reacting to that person, we react to the qualities that we projected on. And that's true for everything that exists in samsara. The way we relate to the world is based upon our experience of it, not the way it actually exists. And so that is when you have a taste of the flavor of emptiness, then you can bring that into your everyday life. We're not going to talk more about it here because it's a very, very complicated topic. And 5 minutes will not do it justice. But just know that when we're talking about the 6 perfections, the wisdom is 2 types. The main wisdom is wisdom that realizes emptiness. And then the conventional wisdom is wisdom that realizes either subtle things that are part of our Dharma practice that are not emptiness, such as the other meditative topics, death and impermanence, perfection and rebirth, all these things that are part of our spiritual life, but they can also be worldly types of wisdom, you know? And if we're using that wisdom to help others, then it's Dharma practice, you know? If you're going to university and getting a degree in business economics, but you're doing it so you can help others, then that wisdom is beneficial, okay? It's not only worldly. If you're doing it because you want to be wealthy and be a stock trader and be really rich and famous, then it's not Dharma. But the same action can be done. So worldly wisdom, especially if we live in the world, worldly wisdom is useful. It lets us help others and it gives us more skillful means, right? Or it has the potential to. So running away from worldly wisdom isn't useful. You can adopt it and nourish it, but do so with the mind that you're doing it for others, not for yourself. But the ultimate wisdom understanding emptiness is most important. And we can incorporate that into our lives by recognizing, especially when we're under the throes of strong emotions, that what we're reacting to is our experience of the thing, not the actual thing. The actual thing doesn't exist that way because there's no inherent existence to any phenomenon, okay? So that's a little taste of how to do wisdom in everyday life. So we'll spend the rest of the time on concentration. The rest of the time, our 2 minutes. Concentration for our purposes is just meditation, right? So obviously we can create a meditation practice for ourselves for every day. We meditate maybe every morning or every evening or both, and that's valuable and useful. But we can also learn to meditate in everything we do. So, you know, Tsongkhapa said, if you say now is an opportunity for study and now is an opportunity for meditation, you're wrong. Because those 2 things need to be combined, not separated, right? And so whatever you're doing is an opportunity. What is meditation? Meditation is becoming familiar with our minds, right? Now, single pointed meditation is obviously learning how to calm our minds and not let our minds be riled up by our emotions. But as a general idea, meditation means becoming familiar with our minds. So you can do that no matter what you're doing. You can be washing the dishes and that can be an act of meditation. It can be an act of strong focus. It can be an act of awareness, or it can be an opportunity for you to be, you know, offering these beautiful, clean dishes as if you're offering a bath to all the Buddhists, you know? You can do many different types of meditation with one physical activity, whatever it may be. So don't think that you can only meditate when you're sitting on a cushion in the morning or in the evening. You know, if you're trying to develop single pointed meditation, doing intense sitting practice is useful for that, but isn't the only way. So we can find opportunities to meditate in our everyday life. Now, I would say when you have to interact with others, that's probably not a good time to meditate, right? So if you're in a business meeting, maybe that's not an act of meditation. Be present with the people you're sharing space with, okay? But when you're doing anything that doesn't involve engaging with other human beings, try to find a way to make it a meditative act, which means an intentional act where every one of your actions and every one of the mental actions accompanying your physical actions, you're trying to be aware of. And you're trying to make it pointed and direct, okay? As opposed to something mindless. I know this is hard for me. I'd much rather have a podcast on when I'm doing my chores and listen to like, some sort of news or world events or all the things that I don't have time for. I'd much rather have that than not. And that's fine if you think that's beneficial to you, but it's also an opportunity you could be meditating. And so you have to decide in your life, maybe you have other ways to meditate. So then you don't do it that way. That's fine. But that is an opportunity to meditate. It's an opportunity to develop concentration, right? When you're doing kind of menial tasks, a perfect opportunity to develop concentration. So you have to find in a balance in your life, what are ways you can bring in this meditation? What can you do to become more familiar with your mind? That's the goal of concentration. Because when you're familiar with your mind, then you aren't overwhelmed by your mind. Then you can use it to focus on virtuous activity and to focus on Dharma activity. And then that makes it more powerful. So it's an act of becoming familiar with your mind. And there are different ways to do that. Sitting on a cushion is powerful because it's so focused, right? When you try to develop calm abiding, the first advice they give is abandon your homeland and find an isolated place, because there are so many distractions in our everyday life that it is hard. So if you really want to commit yourself to it, you want to remove as many external distractions as possible. But since we don't have that luxury, then we say, okay, I can't do that. What can I do? What can I use around me to improve my mind right now? How can I use this opportunity as a chance to meditate or as a chance to become familiar with my mind? So we have to make use of whatever we have. I think another thing when we've built some sort of meditation practice and we have some level of control of our mind, then we can use this as a tool just to help overcome our grossest of emotions. So when you are experiencing distress of some sort, then take 30 seconds to do a focused meditation, to step out from that distress, whether it be an argument with a coworker or with a family member, or whether it be you've heard really bad news that's overwhelming, or any of these things. Take 30 seconds, take a minute, and focus on your mind. First, do a calming meditation, focus on your breath, allow your mind to become calm, and then whatever this thing is that's happening to you, that's causing this extreme emotion, look at it from a neutral way and say, what is it about this that I'm reacting to? What is triggering for me? And is that reaction beneficial right now? Or is there a more beneficial way I can react? Right? It takes 1 minute to do this. But that 1 minute is informed by a daily practice, right? But once you have, and I don't mean a perfect practice, but just our beginner's practice, that's what I mean. And once you do that, you can see that taking a minute out of your day in the middle of an argument can make everything so much easier because you're not giving your emotions the chance to run control. You're trying to grab control back for yourself. So concentration, the practice of the perfection of concentration is something that's invaluable because we're so used to not paying attention to our mind. We're so used to being, led by our emotions, just like a bull that's led by a ring through its nose. Okay. So what we're doing is we have to take control of our own minds, and concentration gives us the tools to do that. Okay, so I'll leave it a little bit for questions if we have it. We've already gone over time, so we won't do any meditation today. But I'll talk through a meditation that I think is really useful. And this is similar to meditations that I've discussed for other practices as well. I know for most of us, meditating in the morning is easiest if you're trying to build a regular practice because you're fresh and you're excited and it's the beginning of your day and there's huge benefits to meditating in the morning. I think it's also useful to meditate in the evenings because you have a whole day's worth of material to meditate on. And so for this practice, what I think you could try to do is at the end of the day, when you're not too tired, or maybe before your evening Netflix, but but after you've gotten a little bit of your stress from the day out, sit down, take 20 minutes, and go through the 6 perfections. And go through your day. What did I do today? How many instances of generosity did I perform today? So go through. And then whenever you notice any, rejoice. Be joyful in that. Then you say, well, how many instances where I could have performed generosity, but I didn't? Recognize those as well. And then develop regret. Don't beat yourself out about it. Don't beat yourself up. You're not being guilty, but you're saying, I could have done better and I didn't. So now I'll do my best to do better tomorrow. What you're doing is creating an opportunity to have resolve to do better. That's the importance of regret. It's not beating yourself up. It's not this guilty feeling that says you're a bad person because you didn't do that. That's not the point. But the point is to notice, oh, I could have done better today and I didn't. So I'll try better tomorrow. So you can go through your day and say, okay, I got up, I made breakfast, I fed the dogs, fed the cat. Go through, literally take an itemized list of what you did during the day. And then you can do it for one day. There are 6 perfections, 7 days in a week, you get 1 holiday. First day, you do just generosity. Don't worry about the other 5. And the next day, just ethical discipline. What are the things I did today that were active engagement with my morality? And when were there places where I could have been more ethical, but I didn't? Where I maybe told a white lie or did something like this. And the same with all 6 of these. You just take 20 minutes at the end of the day. Because what you're doing is, like I said, what we want to do when we practice the 6 perfections is make them our second nature. We don't want to think about them. But the way we get there is by identifying in our lives, when did we actively practice them and when did we avoid them? And by becoming aware of that, then we develop the habit that practicing them becomes second nature. It doesn't become something we have to force. But at first, it is forceful. It's the same thing with all of our good qualities, right? For most of us, we have to put effort in them at first because we're not used to them. When you develop bodhicitta, the mind that wishes to become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings, at first, it's effort called bodhicitta. You have to put a lot of effort in. And then the more you do it, when it develops into actual bodhicitta, it becomes effortless. But that effortlessness comes due to your effort. It's the same with the 6 perfections. So that's a meditation I recommend, is at the end of the day, just take 20 minutes, go through your day, and every day do a different one of the 6 perfections. And see, where did I actually practice this? When you see an instance, rejoice in it, because that's really powerful and important. And then where did I have an opportunity to practice this, but I didn't? Develop a mind of regret and a mind that wishes to do better in the future, a resolve. Okay. And also, how could I have done better? Sometimes we're put in really difficult situations, and given whatever our limited resources are, we can't do better. At least externally. We can do better internally. We can always do better with our minds. But sometimes we're put in hard situations at work, for instance, where you have to engage in things that are difficult, right? So then how can I do that difficult thing, but not have a mind that accompanies it that's so painful, right? Maybe you have to lay off a coworker, or maybe someone engaged in harmful action and you have to discipline them because it's the appropriate thing to do to make sure they don't harm other people in the future. How can you do that without a mind of anger? How can you do that with a mind of patience and love and compassion, right? So by going through your day and noticing when you failed and when you succeeded, you create the opportunity for more success in the future. So I really think that's a powerful practice. If I wasn't so loquacious, then we would have done it today together. But as it is, I'll just give you the bare bones of it, so then you can try it on your own. And the one thing I want to end on is thinking of how the perfections mix together. We all came together today to discuss and explore the teachings of the Buddha, right? To focus on our minds and learn what it means to be a good person in this world of samsara. And so to some extent, this is similar to giving the gift of Dharma. Because we're giving the gift of Dharma to ourselves. Obviously, I'm teaching Dharma right now, so that's a little different. But for the rest of you, you are consuming Dharma for the purpose of improving your mind. It's not actually generosity, but it's close to it. You're actively giving yourself the gift of Dharma practice and Dharma study. And we're engaging in the morality, gathering virtue, because you come together to study the teachings of the Buddha and to learn how to implement them in our lives. So it's a practice of morality. And we've gone through the practice of patience, not only the practice of developing certainty in the Dharma, but also the practice of patience, putting up with the suffering of being in discomfort. So more than one type of patience, trying to develop certainty in the Dharma and acknowledging that right now we might have some slight discomfort, but we're willing to put up with it for the sake of studying Dharma. And by gathering this virtue and by finding joy in this practice, we've developed practice of perseverance. By being attentive to the teachings and by thinking about them and contemplating them and seeing how they work in our lives, we've developed the practice of concentration. And by analyzing this new material and trying to incorporate it into our lives and say, how can this make me a better person? By adopting this wisdom, we practice the perfection of wisdom. So in our single practice today of coming together and discussing the Dharma, we've incorporated all 6 perfections at once. Okay, so it's not an impossible thing to do. It's something we can do all the time. And that's what I want to leave with, is that when we talk about the 6 perfections and we look at bodhisattvas as role models and we see the actions they do and we say that's so far away from me. You know, if you the perfection of the action of generosity and bodhicitta is being able to give away your life to save something. I couldn't do that, right? You can't, most people can't do that. Buddhists could, bodhisattvas can, especially Arya bodhisattvas can. That's the goal. That's the type of generosity and bodhicitta and compassion I'd like to have. So that's what I'm working for, but I'm not there yet. So I look at what I am doing and I rejoice in what I'm doing because I can practice all 6 perfections right now. Maybe not perfected practices of them, but I can engage in their practice. And so we can look at our time together today and realize that it embodies all 6 perfections and take that as inspiration to continue incorporating these into our lives in ways that we find meaningful and ways that allow us to continue to practice and grow in our practice. So with that, I think we'll end today. Is there any questions before we go? I know I went long already, so I apologize. Okay, then maybe we'll just do a few dedication prayers before we end. Okay.
The prayer request there as well. Since you know. But when does it transcend from being the 6 perfections? We're doing that in samsara, aware that we're doing it with our life. When does it transcend to being something much more than just?
So basically, what is the distinction between the perfections and the practice of the perfections? You can kind of say is when you actually become a bodhisattva and these 6 perfections become activities that are no longer require effort but become your natural way of being, then they're transcending samsara in that way. But for now, every day we just make them a little stronger and stronger, and that's how we get towards them, you know. But as long as we have these kind of contaminated bodies and we're living in samsara, that's difficult. So we're working with what tools we have to slowly and slowly get better.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then, if I'm reading this book, my experience with truth.
Mhm.
I was just thinking about it by Mahatma Gandhi. And so he writes all about how he's like everyone and it's how all the, he's trapped in this world. At some point of time, he becomes what he's called the Mahatma, because there's definitely some transition that everyone's written that has happened. So there's something that's happened that people notice it's beyond what they. So in terms of that, I mean, that how when does it something that's other notice of something that we.
I think it's both, but I can't predict when it's going to happen, I can't say, well, when you do 3 years of the practice, then you're going to have this transition, like that. But I think that I know that in my life, I am not even close to perfecting any of the perfections. And I know that I am still overwhelmed by the 3 poisons. I know that. But I also know the way I lived when I was a teenager before I found the Dharma and the amount of anger I had in my life. And so my practice of Dharma, I've seen that anger dissipate, not go away, right? But not be active all the time. And so I've seen that revolution in my life. Doesn't mean I'm a good person. Doesn't mean that I'm like spiritually realized. I don't mean any of that. But I've seen a very noticeable change from before I practiced Dharma until after, right? And so we're going to have mile markers like that in our life. right? That might be profound for us, that may not be profound to other people. And then, but in the same token, thank you. In that very same way, everyone else in my life that's close to me had that same experience of me, right? So when I told my family I was going to become a monk, and after I was finishing grad school, and I told my mother and my siblings and my partner at the time, all of them said, yeah, of course you are. Like, that's obviously the right thing for you to do. Because we've seen you practicing, we've seen, like, all of them knew me before I started practicing Buddhism, and then obviously after. And they said, of course, we've seen how transformed you've been for the last however many years of practice you've had, right? And so in our lives, we'll have these moments, and you can't predict them, and usually you'll only realize them afterwards. You realize them looking back, that I don't engage in things the same way I used to, right? And so I can't give you a timeline, but these kind of things that you experience when you look back at the way you were even a year, if you just do a daily meditation practice for a month and look back a month, and you can see a change in your mind, right? So when we look backwards, we see these things, but you can't predict them forward. And there are some things that are going to be harder to overcome than others. And there are some people that can overcome things really easily just due to their past imprints. And for some of us, it's a struggle and takes a lot more work, you know? So you can't be concerned with others' journey. You only can be concerned with your own journey. And even when that's not validated by others, you know when you're succeeding. If you have a close relationship with a guru, they can also help you, right? And your guru will be able to sense changes in you and transformations of your mind, sometimes that you can't see on your own. But there's no like easy metric. So it's just a matter of being aware and looking back.
I think also the way people's values are different. I mean, normal people, they think you're someone who's rich and who manages a lot of people, who has a lot of power and who's married, and those kind of things are more, they attach more value to those things.
Mm-hmm.
So when they see someone who's a little bit, what do you say, humble or not very show off or not very extravagant, or doesn't, even if they have money, they don't show it, those kind of things, they don't automatically associate that with a successful person.
Mm-hmm.
Some people don't, some people do. Like generally the world would like probably see someone who's rich and famous as better qualities.
We generally,
Someone who like Mother Teresa, even they may like her, but they may not find her someone to aspire to be, right?
we often say that if you actually live your life in a way that abandons the 8 worldly concerns, ordinary people will consider you a crazy person. Because we're habituated to be seeking after fame and glory and success and wealth. And so when you're actively pursuing a life that isn't doing that, to the outside world, you can seem like you're going things backwards, right? So you can't rely on other perceptions of you, but that's true. And you have an inner value of what is it that makes my life spiritual, what spiritual practice makes my life meaningful. And that's what's important, you know. But it goes both ways. The more you practice, I was talking to my sister recently. I don't remember what it was about. I think maybe, I don't remember, but I said something, I said, I don't believe, maybe it was like her son was like really big on like guns and was playing with like toy guns. And I was like, I really just don't like guns, like I never have as like a game, like I don't like it. And I was like, of course, you know, I'm Buddhist, so of course I'm going to say I don't like it. And she's like, well, maybe you're Buddhist because you don't like it, right? It's not that I developed an aversion to that because I started studying Buddhism. There's also part of it that's part of what drew me to studying Buddhism is that was a natural disposition I had, right? So we can see that it goes both ways because we've engaged in spiritual practice in past lives. That's why we're here together today, right? So it's not only that we're learning new things and incorporating into our lives, it's what draws us to this practice is things about ourselves that we've already been working on in this life and in past lives. And now we're refining them and learning new language and new skills, but it's not like something totally foreign to us, right? So we have both of these things. Yeah, okay. Let's with that, we will not do. Okay. Let's turn to page 101 in the gold book for dedication prayers. So we recognize, excuse me. We want to make our practices virtuous in the beginning, middle, and end. By setting a motivation and by engaging in prayers in the beginning, we made our practices virtuous in the beginning. By studying the teachings of the Buddha and by contemplating the meaning, we engage in virtuous practice in the middle. And now we will dedicate any merit we've accumulated. And in so doing, we make our practice virtuous in the end. So therefore, it's virtuous in 3 ways, in the beginning, middle, and end. And so we recognize that by coming together today, we've accumulated some sort of virtue, some merit, some good karma. And instead of keeping that for ourselves, we realize that the purpose of our life is to serve others, and therefore we dedicate all of our merit to others. May all of our good karma ripen on other sentient beings, that they may experience happiness, they may experience freedom from suffering, freedom from illness, freedom from poverty. Those who have died, may they be quickly reborn in perfect human rebirths and meet precious holy gurus that lead them to the path of enlightenment. We especially want to dedicate for those who are on our prayer list. So Malati Prakash and Hamsa Moili and Richard, those 2 have deceased. Richard Gere, who is unwell apparently. Harshita, who is deceased. Kim, who is unwell. Deepika, who is depressed. Jeffrey Hopkins, who passed away recently. All of the victims, all the Holocaust victims and their families, and generally all those who are in the midst of suffering or in the midst of war, who are experiencing grave injustice in that way, as well as Kavita, who is unwell. For all those in my family, may they experience harmony, joy, and peace. For Tonason, may they recover from surgery quickly. From Aditi, may they recover from dengue and other illness quickly. So may all those, including those specifically we requested to pray for, and all those who have no one to pray for them, all those who have not been requested, may we keep them in our thoughts. May all of our good merit ripen on them, that they may be freed from their illnesses, and then may all of their wishes may be fulfilled in accordance with the Dharma. May all sentient beings be free from all the suffering of samsara quickly and more quickly, and might we become Buddhists so that we might be of maximum benefit in order to lead them out of suffering. Okay, with that, we will recite the dedication prayers on page 101. Long life prayer for His Holiness Dalai Lama. And then turning the page, the prayer that spontaneously fulfills all wishes. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that is not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good, all powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso. Please remain until samsara ends. Savior of the snowland teachings and transmigratory beings who make extremely clear the path that is the unification of emptiness and compassion. To the lotus holder, Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. May the glorious Guru's lives be long and stable. May all beings equal in the extent of space have happiness. May I and all others without exception accumulate merit and purify negativities. And may we be blessed to quickly attain Buddhahood. And let's turn the page and just do the final dedication verses. May the King of Dharma, Tsongkhapa, the way of Dharma practice flourish. May the omens of obstacles be pacified and all the conducive circumstances be complete. By relying on the 2 accumulations of myself and others in the 3 times, may the teachings of the conqueror Lobsang Drakpa blaze for a long time. Okay, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.